Sunny took a step forward and brandished the Soul Serpent, feeling the indomitable nature of Saint's grounded battle style permeate his bones. The gloomy shadow wrapped itself around the blade of the Odachi, causing it to shine with dark radiance. Just like the taciturn demon, this serpent shared a kinship with the shadow, and as such, the augmentation it received was even more powerful than Sunny himself could enjoy, even though the Odachi was only of the dormant rank for now. This alone made it equal to an awakened blade in terms of sharpness, durability, and lethality. He activated the living stone and feather of truth enchantments of the onyx armor to make it light as a feather and able to heal the damage it was bound to receive. Then, Sunny summoned the Blood Blossom charm and willed the armor to integrate it, activating the Underworld Armament enchantment. This way, the enhancing effect the Crimson Flower had on his memories and shadows was going to be inherited by the Mantle itself, and then strengthened even further. He had not told the other Awakened to make the nightmare creatures bleed just to seem cool. He literally needed there to be as much blood flowing to the pavement as possible, so that his armor and sword became as powerful as possible. The gate was open now, revealing a dark rift in the fabric of reality. As wide as the street itself and as tall as the buildings, it seemed to devour all light around it, and call for him to enter. Sunny wasn't too preoccupied with the gate itself, though. His gaze was locked on the unclear silhouettes moving through the darkness. Soon, the first nightmare creature burst into the daylight, leaving cracks on the asphalt with its black claws. He gave a low murmur of satisfaction. Good. Had he not wanted to accumulate shadow fragments? Had he not wanted to raise the counter of the Prince of the Underworld enchantment? Well, he should have been careful about what he wished for. There were going to be hundreds of abominations coming through the rift today to satiate his wish. The second category gates were the most frequent to appear in the waking world. As such, everyone was familiar with how they functioned. The first few waves of advancing nightmare creatures were not going to be too terrible, at least for a fighter of Sunny's caliber. They would be comprised mostly of dormant creatures, with some awakened abominations mixed in. Their classes and numbers, too, would be comparatively low. But these first few waves, they were just a hint of the horror to come. Pretty soon, every nightmare creature coming from the gate was going to be of the awakened rank, with more and more fallen ones appearing as well. Their classes were going to rise, until there were as many demons as there were monsters and beasts around. And if Sunny was still alive by the time this second stage was nearing its culmination, well, two things could happen, neither promising him anything good. Either the gate was going to end up really being of the second category, or not. If it continued to grow, reaching the third category, then there would be more and more waves of nightmare creatures, hundreds of fallen abominations lunging into the real world from the dark void between worlds, with corrupted horrors and creatures of higher classes appearing among them. If it didn't, then the Guardian of the Gate would manifest itself into reality. The Guardian was always at least one rank higher than the Gate's category, and could be of any high class, from a devil to a dreaded titan. In any case, Sunny had to live through the initial waves first to find out what was going to kill him in the end. The first creature to appear from the darkness resembled a terrifying hound with blood-red bone spikes growing from its mottled black fur. It landed on the road and opened its maw, then produced a guttural, hoarse roar, and then abruptly grew silent as Shadow Serpent's blade slashed across its neck, severing its head entirely.
You have slain a dormant beast.
Sunny jumped back, and just as he did, more silhouettes lunged at him from the dark rift, their eyes burning with madness and bloodthirst as they smelled what was waiting for them up ahead. A whole world full of defenseless, untainted souls for them to devour. Sunny muttered that they were not getting past him so fast, the filth. Sunny had a very simple plan. He was going to build a barrier in front of the gate. He was going to build a mountain of bleeding corpses right at the border of the darkness, to show the next waves of nightmare creatures how welcoming the real world was to their kind. As soon as more spiked hounds entered into the light, he lunged forward to meet them. Blood sprayed into the air, and as the menacing Odachi reaped another life, Sunny shifted his weight, slammed the pommel of the sword into the face of a lunging creature, then swiftly stepped forward and pierced the third one through the throat. Before the drops of blood even fell to the ground, he tore the blade from the corpse of the abomination, slicing it almost in half, and brought his heel on the skull of the beast he had previously slammed to the ground. In the process, he increased the weight of the mantle of the underworld, so the creature's head simply exploded under his boot. All of it took no more than 2 seconds, and on the third second, a dozen hellish beasts emerged from the rift, some of them running, some of them jumping high into the air to land on him from above. Behind them, a macabre wall of flesh, claws, and fangs was spilling out of the darkness like a rabid tide. Sunny growled, feeling the enchantment of the blood blossom activate and fill his sword with an unquenchable bloodlust. He roared for them to come, the bastards, and let this mongrel guide them all to hell. Sunny is turning that gate into a graveyard, and the real fight is just beginning. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss the next episode. No matter how fast Sunny was, how intricate his control of the shadow essence was, he had spent a whole month doing nothing but practicing it, after all. No matter how strong his body could become, as the result, he still couldn't be in several places at the same time. Yes, he had 2 cores brimming with power, and his armor and his weapon were augmented by a combination of an aspect ability and enchantments. Killing one of the infernal hounds without receiving a hit was not that big of a problem. Several, even. But a dozen. That was too much even for him, so Sunny didn't even try. At this point, Mantle of the Underworld was as close to the pinnacle of the ascended rank as a memory could be, so these dormant beasts had no chance of piercing it with their fangs. He could allow himself to be bitten a few times. He just had to be strategic about it. He had to protect his neck and the back of his head, as well as pay attention to balance and mass. Yes, the abominations couldn't get to his flesh just yet, but an impact was still an impact. If he wasn't careful, the bastards were going to topple him, and once he was on the ground, the game would be over. Luckily, he had Feather of Truth at his disposal and could manipulate the weight of the onyx armor, turning it from incredibly light to as heavy as a mountain. In conjunction with the cautious use of Saint's grounded style, which excelled at solid footwork and indomitability, he could stay upright no matter how many beasts attacked him. Ignoring the creatures that were lunging at him from the ground, Sunny dashed to the side to avoid being landed on by one of the jumping hounds, and received another on the tip of the Odachi, allowing the momentum to impale it on the sword, before the heavy carcass could weigh the Shadow Serpent down. Sunny used the long hilt as a lever and slammed the dead creature into the mass of its attacking kin. By that time, one jaw was already closing on his thigh, and another was centimeters away from his forearm. The blood-red fangs scraped against the stone-like metal of the onyx armor, not leaving even a scratch on it. Sunny let go of the hilt of the Odachi with one hand, then hooked its blade under the throat of one of the attacking abominations and made a simple move forward, slicing through tough fur, skin, and vulnerable flesh beneath. His other fist landed on the head of the second beast. Unseen to anyone, the moonlight shard appeared in it at the last moment, its ghostly blade easily piercing the creature's skull and disappearing as fast as it had appeared after destroying its brain. Sunny spun, throwing both corpses aside, caught the hilt of the Odachi with his second hand, made a small thrust to pierce a lunging hound's head right through one of its eyes, and then dashed forward to descend on the group of them entangled in the carcass of the abomination he had caught on the tip of his blade earlier. What happened next could only be described as a morbid, bloody dance. Sunny moved through the mass of nightmare creatures, much faster than any of them were, his great sword flying through them with graceful and fluid logic, sending more and more blood spraying into the air. Somehow, he managed to avoid most of their attacks, and those he did not ended up sliding fruitlessly from his armor. He almost made it look easy, but of course it wasn't. Any of these beasts, even though they were only dormant, could massacre countless mundane humans or kill a less skillful awakened in one fell lunge. It was just that today they met a far more terrifying creature, a true awakened fighter, and a monstrous one at that. Sunny cut through the mass of spiked hounds, strategically leaving many of them maimed but alive. They could only bleed as long as they weren't dead after all, and he needed them to bleed a lot to bring the blood blossom to the peak of its strength. There were many of them around him, too many really, but that too could be used to his advantage. He used the corpses of the beasts he had slain, the ones he had left alive, and those who were yet to meet his blade as a barrier to slow down the others. Through superior speed and clever positioning, he was able to not only always remain moving, but also evade being surrounded. Things weren't exactly easy, but he was still managing without too much strain. His main problem right now was to not allow any of the abominations to move past him and escape into the streets. Luckily, the few that did manage to slip by were quickly finished by the 6 awakened staying behind, observing the massacre with grim, tense, and darkly awed expressions. However, Sunny wasn't oblivious to the fact that this successful start was an illusion. The first wave was just an appetizer after all, simply a hint of the true calamity to come. So, his goal for now was to kill as many of the dormant beasts as he could, bring the augmentation of the blood blossom to considerable strength, and throw as many corpses at the stretch of cracked asphalt directly in front of the gate as possible. To make it harder for the stronger abominations to enter into the real at full speed. He felt the dreaded change too soon, though. It came in a form of an eerie, long whistle that suddenly made the hounds lunge at him with renewed fury. And then, a crude arrow suddenly flashed out of the darkness of the rift, almost hitting him in the eye. The arrowhead, fashioned out of a splinter of a red bone, exploded against the wood of Weaver's mask, throwing his head back. Sunny gasped, startled by the impact. He swiftly repositioned and caught his balance, then dashed forward and skewered several beasts on the blade of the Shadow Serpent. More arrows flew out of the darkness, piercing the flesh of the attacking hounds or sliding off the onyx surface of the mantle of the underworld. He felt each hit, though. The power behind these arrows was truly monstrous. Sunny shouted that awakened creatures were coming already, disbelief and alarm plain in his voice. As soon as he thought that, the first of the hunters came out of the darkness, following their hounds into the real world. Sunny gritted his teeth. A tall, desiccated humanoid with skin as black as coal and as rough as the bark of an ancient tree, wearing rotten remains of fur armor, raised a mighty bow made out of wood and bone, and looked at him with empty holes where his eyes should have been. Furious, red flames burned in their darkness instead. Sunny spat a sharp curse. Sunny grabbed one of the hounds and hoisted its body up, just in time for the arrow to pierce its body instead of hitting him in the face. Sunny snarled in disbelief that they were using bows. How was that even fair? Feeling the bloodlust of the blossom charm surge in his heart, Sunny threw the dying hound at the bone hunter, gripped his sword, and dashed forward once again. There were several ancient archers aiming at him already, and more of the hunters were appearing from the darkness. Some wielded bows, some spears with jagged flint blades and crude axes. Those were awakened monsters, each and every one, equal in rank and class to carapace centurions Sunny had fought once, a long time ago on the Forgotten Shore, and to Sunny himself, technically, a much tougher enemy for him to slaughter. Luckily, unlike the massive centurions, the hunters weren't covered in adamantine chitin from head to toe. Ducking under the flying arrow, Sunny lunged forward and thrust the tip of the Odachi into the desiccated flesh of one of the bowmen. The black, bark-like skin offered a lot of resistance to the shadow-honed blade, but the force of the blow was terrible enough to rip through flesh and bone, allowing it to pierce the body of the hunter and emerge from his back. Sunny just hoped that these bastards had anatomy similar to humans, and that their hearts were located in the same place. From the look of it, they were. However, the monster did not react to having his heart destroyed as a human would. Instead of dying, he simply grabbed the blade of the Shadow Serpent and took a step forward, skewering himself deeper onto it in an attempt to reach Sunny with the other hand. Sunny hissed a curse through gritted teeth. Sunny twisted the blade, severing the monster's fingers, and then pulled the Odachi upward, slicing through his ribcage, neck and skull. This finally caused the bowman to die.
You have slain an awakened monster, ancient barrow wraiths.
Revenants great, simply great, damn it.
So he was fighting corpses that were possessed by some sort of a murderous spirit. As such, the hunters weren't fully sentient. That didn't stop them from remembering some of their craft, though. Not only were they able to wield their stone weapons with deadly skill, they also seemed to coordinate their attacks, hurting Sunny like prey. The archers moved apart so that he would have no choice but to show his back to one while attacking another. Those with melee weapons rushed forward, aiming to surround him. The situation was quickly turning desperate. Sunny gritted his teeth, dodged a strike of a stone axe, saw it shatter the asphalt into dust, and lashed out with the Soul Serpent. Just a moment after the blade of the great Odachi severed the attacker's legs, another arrow hit him in the shoulder, causing Sunny to stagger and almost lose his balance. He glanced around him, noticing that the enemies had succeeded in positioning themselves in a way that would have doomed a normal enemy. He was surrounded from all sides, with archers hiding behind mighty hunters wielding spears and axes. Sunny muttered that he hadn't wanted to do this. As a dozen arrows streaked through the air to bite at his armor, Sunny suddenly disappeared. A moment later, he appeared behind one of the archers and decapitated him with one terrible strike. Before others even had time to register what had happened, Sunny was inexplicably at the opposite side of their formation, his Odachi piercing the head of another archer. Almost leaving afterimages behind, the figure of the warrior in the menacing onyx armor seemed to blink between half a dozen monsters in the span of a few seconds. Each time it appeared, one of the creatures died, their black bodies crumbling into piles of severed limbs and shattered skulls. The blade of the great Odachi shone with dark radiance, cutting through the ancient hunters like a reaper's scythe. A few moments later, Sunny slid backward on the broken asphalt, leaving a bloody trail behind. A low growl escaped from beneath his mask. Enhanced by the Underworld Armament, the enchantment of the Blood Blossom was behaving strangely. It was supposed to augment his memories, echoes, and shadows, but with so much blood flowing to the ground, Sunny found that even his body and mind were being affected by the morbid charm a little. He felt both exhilarated and frustrated. Exhilarated by the slaughter he was perpetrating and frustrated because he needed, to kill more, cut more, make them bleed more, so much more. Sunny growled for blood, more blood, his voice thick with savage thirst. Sunny basked in the ecstasy of bloodshed for a split second, and then lashed out at himself, making the rabid thirst recede. He needed to be careful. This bloodlust was beneficial but could easily blind him. He had to maintain clarity. That was the only way to control the flow of the battle and survive. Thankfully, he knew how to keep a cool head better than most regardless. Although using shadow step so many times in rapid succession cost him a lot of shadow essence, he had managed to break the enemy formation and eliminate most of the archers. The rest were going to be much easier to deal with now. But of course, the gate was not done with him. It continued to spew more and more enemies, making any progress he had made meaningless. As a new wave of hunters emerged from the darkness, a frenzied mass of hounds rushing between the wraiths, he paled a little. Too many. No matter how superior his armor, weapon, and skill were, he was going to get buried under the tide of nightmare creatures due to their momentum. And even if he managed to cut a hole in the wall of abominations, the rest were going to move past him and descend upon the six awakened, and then, inevitably, escape into the streets of the city, toward Rain's school. Sunny cursed, damning the situation and dreading what was about to come, as the new wave of creatures lunged forward. Joining the survivors of the previous one, Sunny shifted his memories around. For a brief second, the broken oath took the place of the Blood Blossom, its soul-eroding aura being inherited and enhanced by the mantle of the underworld. A wave of nausea washed other Sunny's mind. Sunny let out a pained groan. A mental scream rang in his head. Luckily, he was prepared for the pain. His armor provided him with a solid defense against soul attacks too, even ones coming from the mantle itself. The attacking nightmare creatures, on the other hand, had no resistance to it at all. Sunny had only kept the broken oath active for a second before changing the slotted charm back to the Blood Blossom, but it was enough to break the momentum of the tide of abominations. The hunters staggered, the hounds stumbled and slowed down. For a brief moment, the whole mass of monsters seemed disoriented. Sunny used this opportunity well. The dark figure wearing a fearsome mask suddenly appeared in the very middle of the enemies, and before the nightmare creatures could regain their bearing, The great blade of the Odachi turned into a whirlwind of darkness, leaving clouds of bloody mist and severed corpses everywhere he went. Sunny had abandoned Saint's grounded style, reduced the weight of the mantle of the underworld to that of a feather, and turned to pure offense, dancing between the enemies like a dark, slaughtering demon. For now, he was still at his peak. But exhaustion was already not too far behind. As he fought, his breath was slowly becoming hoarse and labored. Sunny gasped, wondering aloud how long it had been. He thought back to what had happened until now, and felt the first hint of desperation. Just a couple of minutes. The whole battle took slightly more than 2 minutes, and he had to continue for at least 11 more. 6 minutes. That was how long Sunny managed to hold on until things really went from bad to terrible. By then, the ground in front of the gate was littered with piles of corpses, their blood flowing down the pavement like a crimson stream. He had lost count of how many dormant abominations he had slain, how many ancient hunters he had sliced apart. Despite how strong and fearsome the primeval wraiths were, their assault had broken against the impenetrable barrier of his blade, his aspect. And his will. Sunny paid a price, though. By now, his muscles were burning and he had to force the air in and out of his struggling lungs. The mantle of the underworld held, but his body beneath the black stone-like metal was beaten and battered. The armor itself was covered in blood and dented slightly in several places. Those dents did not come from the hunters, though. During the third wave, new nightmare creatures emerged from the darkness of the gate. Among them were larger beasts, more terrifying than the hounds Sunny had been slaughtering. And their masters, the demons of the mysterious barrow, were similar to the desiccated huntsmen, but much taller, stronger, and better equipped. They wielded masterfully crafted flint weapons and armors made out of rotten leather and bone, their empty eyes burning with hungry red flames. What's worse, they really knew how to use their stone spears and swords. Met with the strange, ferocious, and deviously lethal battle style of the primeval demons, Sunny was sent for a loop. This was like nothing he had ever experienced before. They fought with the straightforward, yet insidious resolve of cunning apex predators, with the evil will to kill through any means necessary, always following the most efficient and barbarously cruel path to dominance. It should not have worked, but it did. The dents on Sunny's armor could attest to it. Well, he shouldn't have been surprised. If these ancient wraiths came from people similar to his own world's prehistoric humans, then they were the most devastating of predators, ruthless killers on a planetary scale. From what little Sunny knew about history, ancient humans had spread across the whole planet like a plague, eviscerating whole types of living creatures, including all other nascent branches of the human kind, in one fell avalanche. With their flint weapons and the knowledge of fire, they became nothing less than the cause and perpetrators of the sixth mass extinction, equal to the likes of massive asteroids and climate shifts despite their puny size and lifespan. He was kind of starting to miss the Carapace Legion. In any case, Sunny somehow managed to kill these terrifying fighters. A few of them, at least. 2 more than that. He reached into the very essence of shadow dance and greedily absorbed every nuance of their primeval and ferocious fighting style, and then reflected it back at the waves of nightmare creatures, bringing his already terrifying dance of death to a truly chilling level of brutality. The blood blossom had long ago reached its limit. Minutes passed, and despite the fact that Sunny was battered and growing dangerously tired, his reserves of shadow essence swiftly diminishing for a few moments, he felt as though he had things under control. That maybe, just maybe, he was going to stand his ground for the whole 13 minutes. Then he realized that he would not. As the 6th minute came to an end, a furious bellow shook the world, and something massive lunged at him from the darkness of the gate. The barrier of corpses he had built in front of it exploded, and a giant beast, twice as tall as Sunny as weighing at least 20 times more, emerged from it in a cloud of blood and bone fragments, 2 empty eye sockets full of ghostly red flame. Sunny stared at it with wide eyes. The creature resembled a giant bison. Its black fur mottled and rotten, a ridge of long scarlet bone spikes piercing the hide along the spine. The head of the monstrosity was crowned with 2 jagged, blood-red horns. Sunny breathed that the thing was fallen, dread and disbelief plain in his voice. The bison was also different from the hounds and larger beasts he had been fighting against since it, just like the ancient hunters, was itself a wraith, a corpse reanimated by the malevolent spirit of red flame. Sunny spat another curse. Sunny hurriedly commanded the Feather of Truth to make his armor as heavy as possible and lowered his stance, knowing full well that he couldn't allow that thing to get past him. In the next moment, 2,000 kilograms of rotting flesh and sharp horns crashed into him at full speed. Sunny choked out a strangled cry as the impact hit him. For a split second, everything became dark. Then, Sunny found himself bouncing off the asphalt and then rolling across it at a terrible speed. Up until the moment a wall of a building stopped him and exploded, shards of cement flying into the air. Sunny groaned that this was not good. Disoriented, he shook his head, feeling drops of blood seep under Weaver's mask, and then used the Shadow Serpent to help himself stand up. Then he looked toward the gate through the red mist clouding his sight. The massive wraith was approaching the six terrified awakened. Its speed, however, was slow, and its steps staggered. There was a big hole in its forehead, where the thick adamantine bones of the skull were shattered and cracked, bits of bloody pulp spilling out of it and falling to the ground. Just before the impact, Sunny had brought his armored fist down on it, summoning the Moonlight Shard at the last moment. His plan was to pierce the big bastard's brain, but because of the violent force and momentum of their collision, he ended up doing that, and then punching a hole through the creature's forehead with his spiked gauntlet. Sunny's thoughts were slow and astray, but he was already starting to regain his senses. Sunny muttered that he thought he had a concussion. Failing to breach the last few meters to the six awakened, the bison stopped and swayed. Its legs suddenly caved, and it toppled over, sending a tremor running through the ground. A flood of abominations was already rushing into the breach it had created, though, into the empty space where Sunny had been. Still disoriented, Sunny staggered. Then raised the Soul Serpent weakly. Sunny whispered that this was bad, really bad. As nightmare creatures rushed forward, the six awakened began to act. The two with elemental aspects attacked first. Something flashed in the air, and then one of them was suddenly surrounded by a swiftly spinning ring of fire. The fire disk then flew forward and collided against the mass of abominations, immolating one of the hounds and burning several more. The other raised her hand, and a thin blade made of nothing but air whistled as it bit into the flesh of one of the hunters. Severing one of his arms at the shoulder, Sunny blinked.
You have slain a fallen monster.
The fastest of the nightmare creatures were already lunging at the defenders. The girl he had spoken to before took a step forward and attacked with a slender saber, striking at the neck of a spiked hound and opening its artery with a precise cut. Two more awakened were covering her from the sides, both wielding a shield and a memory weapon of their own. One a short sword, the other a steel pike. The last one did something to repel the arrows that were already flying toward their bodies. But Sunny had no idea what.
Your shadow grows stronger.
The awakened were performing well. They acted with sufficient coordination and foresight, doing everything in their power to slow down the tide of approaching monsters. Although not elites, each of them was a capable combatant. They were brave and determined. And yet, it was not going to be enough. Not nearly enough to survive, let alone prevent the invaders from escaping into the city.
You have received a memory.
What to do, what to do.
Not fully realizing what he was doing, Sunny commanded the shadow to wrap itself around his body and for the Soul Serpent to slither back onto his skin. Immediately, he felt much more powerful, his head more clear. His muscles brimmed with raw strength, double what he had just a second ago. His breathing became deeper. Sunny knew that he had to slow the abominations down and then get back into the fight. That was the only way. Making a step forward, he swayed a little, and then grabbed the roof of an abandoned PTV to help himself keep balance. Bending down, he then grabbed the bottom of the heavy alloy vehicle with his other hand, sending all of his essence rushing through his body, flooding it with as much strength as he could muster. He then growled and dug into the alloy with his fingers. And then, sending cracks through the asphalt, Sunny strained every muscle in his body to perform one devastating, explosive push. The window of the PTV exploded, and as its frame deformed, the whole vehicle suddenly flew into the air. It breached the distance between him and the rushing tide of nightmare creatures and crashed into it from the side like a bizarre cannonball, turning several dormant beasts into bloody pulp, breaking numerous bones, and sending most of the front row of abominations tumbling down. The runes shimmered in front of Sunny, and with no time to waste, he threw just one look at them. Searching for the description of his new memory, he was only interested in one thing. Memory type, weapon. Sunny muttered that it was good enough. Not bothering with reading the rest, Sunny summoned the weapon and used Shadow Step to appear amid the reeling abominations. Some had avoided his improvised ram and were already either attacking the 6 awakened or escaping into the streets. He couldn't do anything about it now. What he could do, though, as an ancient spear with a head crafted out of a long and sharp piece of black obsidian materialized in his hands, he thrust it into the throat of one of the wraiths, then used its back end to slam another one in the chest. Then, Sunny spun the spear and brought it down on the head of a lunging hound, shattering its skull with one terrifying blow. While he tried to overcome the ringing in his ears and continued to fight, more nightmare creatures got past him. And more still were already emerging from the gate. Sunny screamed for them to die, the damn wretches, to die faster. A voice announced that they had breached the line of defenders. The voice of the headmaster seemed calm, considering the situation, so the children gathered in the combat training hall of the school didn't panic either. Nevertheless, they could feel that the adults were frightened, and that fear spread like an infection. The children were frightened too. For many of the younger kids, this was the first time they experienced being near an opening gate. Those who were older knew what to do in theory. Only none of those things could be done. There was just not enough time to evacuate or reach the nearest shelter, and so the lessons they had learned were useless. Everyone was gathered in the most protected place in the school, the gymnasium, and huddled together. The younger children were placed in the middle, the older ones near the edge, with the teachers standing the furthest from the center. The combat instructors were armed with actual memory weapons, which looked menacing and beautiful. At least to Rain, who had never seen her teacher wield one of his real weapons before. With him, the other instructors, and a couple of bodyguards who happened to be inside the school because of those children whose parents were really important. There were 5 awakened among them, each armed and ready to fight. The other teachers and older students were armed too, albeit with mundane weapons. Rain herself was holding her training sword, realizing for the first time how flimsy and pathetic it was. Before, the sword had always seemed to weigh a ton and be unnecessarily sharp. Now, she wished that it was a real weapon and not just a training one. Rain asked what was going to happen. Because she happened to be standing near the headmaster, she saw her combat instructor glance at him and say something in a low voice. Rain wasn't supposed to hear it, most likely, but she did. He said that it was a miracle they had held that long, really. Only 7 of them. And he didn't know who these people were, but they should have been overwhelmed in the first minute. Rain stammered, overwhelmed. But if 7 awakened were supposed to die in less than a minute, then what about the 5 protecting them? Rain suddenly felt cold and scared. The whole thing didn't seem real. How can something like this happen? This school was so prestigious and expensive, and so many important people sent their children here. Surely, the defenses. As though answering her thoughts, muffled sounds of firing penetrated the walls and sent shivers running through everyone's bodies. The automatic turrets had gone online, which meant that there were nightmare creatures approaching. Rain's father worked for the government, handling matters having to do with the logistical support of the awakened, and although he didn't like to talk about work, she knew more about these matters than most kids of her age. Because of that, she understood how ineffective mundane weapons were against the creatures of the spell, especially ones of higher ranks. So she just hoped that. Something broke with a deafening crash, and the whole gymnasium suddenly trembled. Sea curses. Rain gripped the hilt of her sword tighter and turned toward where the crash had come from with a pale face. Her eyes widened. Hundreds of meters away in the mass of nightmare creatures, Sunny sent another abomination to hell, threw its body away and growled. There were so many of them. Too many. Through the shadow hiding beside Rain, he saw that those monsters that had gotten past him and the other defenders had reached the school. He also saw more and more creatures arriving through the gate. Beasts, monsters, and demons, awakened and fallen. There was simply no end to them. He was dead tired and growing weaker fast. His body was at its limit, his reserves of shadow essence were running dry, and even the mantle of the underworld was showing signs of straining to resist the never-ending rain of blows he was not able to evade anymore. Feeling blood streaming down his face, Sonny briefly glanced toward the distant school, then back at the gate. And then he shivered. Something had changed. Something was coming. In the darkness of the gate, a new silhouette appeared. A moment later, all the beasts that surrounded him froze, and then howled triumphantly, as though to welcome the new creature to the waking world. The gate guardian had arrived. Sonny stared at the gate, momentarily paralyzed by dread. Then he snapped out of it and fought through exhaustion, rushing to kill as many abominations as he could before the guardian came out of the gate. He had an inkling that after, there would not be an opportunity to pay them any attention. Sonny gasped, asking if it was the guardian and how many minutes it had been. He had no idea. Somewhere along the way, Sonny had lost count of the time. All he knew was that it had not been long enough. Meanwhile, a hulking figure emerged from the darkness of the gate, and as it did, the red flames burning in the empty eye sockets of the ancient wraiths flashed brighter, their dead mouths opening to produce a litany of menacing howls. Sonny stammered a panicked curse. The guardian was more than 4 meters tall, his desiccated body resembling that of the primeval hunters and demons Sonny had fought, but at the same time much more frightening. He wielded a long spear. Its blade cut out of a single slab of obsidian and covered in so many stains of ancient, dried blood that it seemed as though the stone itself had absorbed them and turned dark red. The giant was wearing an intricate leather armor, much more robust and imposing than those of the lesser wraiths, with strips of strange, bluish iron woven onto it. His wrists bore dozens of bracelets made out of iron and bone, and on his shoulders was a cloak fashioned out of the hide of some terrifying monster. The skull of the creature served as his helm, and his face was covered by a disturbing burial mask, its features twisted and bestial. The mask, and the skull on his head, each had 3 eyes, all 6 emanating intense, malevolent red radiance. Sonny felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Sonny breathed the question of what that thing was. He didn't know what kind of a creature the ancient chieftain was, but had no doubts that he was a fallen tyrant, and a very powerful one at that. Maybe the barrow these wraiths were coming from had been built to entomb this ancient menace to begin with, and his mask had 3 eyes. Anything with 3 eyes made Sonny shudder, for reasons he did not fully understand. After the Forgotten Shore, he knew that this was a sign of something too terrible for him to know. Could he kill a fallen tyrant? Maybe if he had a lot of time to prepare and study his enemy and attacked from the shadow. But now, with Sonny exhausted and battered, his shadow essence running out, and hundreds of nightmare creatures surrounding their master in bloodthirsty exaltation, he stood no chance. None at all. Well, maybe a very tiny one. And what else was he going to do other than try and fight, put his tail between his legs and run away? Well, sure. Why the hell not? Sonny was not some kind of a hero, nor had he ever wanted to be one. But he wasn't going to run away just yet. As the nightmare creatures renewed their assault with even more frenzied rage than before, he gritted his teeth and brandished the obsidian spear, feeling the primal battle style of the ancient wraith seep into his very bones. Sonny was not done spilling blood. He had a little bit of fight left in him, still. In the gymnasium, silence and fear gave way to mayhem and panic. The walls of the school had been breached, and nightmare creatures crawled inside, madness burning in their terrifying empty eyes. A voice shouted for everyone to get back. The children were pushed against one of the walls, teachers standing between them and the terrible monsters with mundane weapons in their trembling hands. The awakened were engaged in a ferocious battle. But just the 5 of them were not nearly enough to stop all the abominations. It was inevitable that sooner or later, some of the abominations were bound to get through. And soon they did. A giant, harrowing beast that resembled an infernal wolf, jagged red spikes growing through its black flesh and drops of saliva falling from its maw tore free of the battle and lunged at the children. Rain had never seen something so unstoppable. How was anyone supposed to fight such a thing? No human possibly could. The teachers tried, however. Several of them drew their bows, but the arrows simply slid off the mottled black fur of the hellhound. The headmaster tried to stop the creature with a heavy pike, but was simply thrown away, the weapon flying out of his hands. And then, there was no one else standing between the monster and the defenseless children.
God got him it.
Sonny was at the end of his rope, which, in a sense, was precisely where he wanted to be. He wasn't trying to stop the flood of nightmare creatures by killing all of them anymore. That was simply impossible with how many there were and how many were coming from the gate every second. He was, however, trying to draw as much attention as he could, all of the attention, really. And to accomplish that, he had to do one simple thing. He had to attack the tyrant. How hard could it be? Sonny muttered that they would find out. Sonny wasn't planning to get into a prolonged fight with the damn Barrow chieftain, or whatever that thing was called. He was just going to exchange one, maybe 2 strikes with the scary bastard, hopefully deal him a tiny wound and Shadow step into safety. Enough was enough. He knew his limits. Tearing through the mass of abominations, Sonny cut a bloody path toward the hulking tyrant and finally appeared in front of him. As soon as the burial mask with 3 burning red eyes turned his way, Sonny suddenly felt small and weak. The pain he felt in his battered body surged, and an involuntary groan escaped from his lips. He just wanted to stop and fall to the ground, to kneel. Sonny snarled through the pain, snarling that it was a mind attack and that was all. And that the bastard should have met Gunlog and learned how to really make people cower. And also, his own mask was much scarier than the crude thing covering the tyrant's face. Fighting through the oppressive hex, Sonny lunged forward and raised his bloodied spear. He didn't get a chance to attack, though. Although it didn't seem as though the tyrant of the Barrow was moving with haste, his hand shot toward Sonny with such terrifying speed that he barely had time to react. The giant didn't even deem it necessary to use a weapon, intending to crush him with a fist, making the mantle of the underworld as heavy as he could. Sonny turned the shaft of the spear around and held it with both hands, knowing to deflect the blow instead of blocking it. He should have been able to. The fist of the desiccated giant connected with the ancient spear and easily shattered it as though it was a mundane stick and not a memory of the ascended rank. Before Sonny could even feel the terrible impact reverberate through his bones, 5 massive fingers closed around his torso like a steel bear trap and squeezed. Sonny stammered a panicked curse.
Your memory has been destroyed.
What a shame. He didn't even get a chance to learn what it was called. The stone-like metal of the mantle of the underworld groaned, but held. His bones, reinforced by the steadfast temperance of the bone weave, held too. Not that Sonny was having a good time. It felt as though he was being slowly crushed to death, unable to draw in a single breath. It hurt as hell too, much worse than that actually. But worse still, while the tyrant had him in his grip, he couldn't use Shadow Step. He couldn't escape. Sonny wheezed that he thought he had messed up. As Sonny struggled in the tyrant's iron grip, the giant tilted his head a little and easily lifted him off the ground, bringing his prey closer to the 3 burning red eyes. Sonny gritted his teeth and groaned, feeling his whole body being slowly crushed by the monstrous chieftain of the Barrow Wraiths. One of his arms was pressed against his body, and the other one was too, but just barely, if only he could free it. But no matter how hard he tried, the tyrant's hold was just too strong. Back in the gymnasium, the terrifying beast was lunging at the defenseless children. Its maw was wide open, the red shine of the ghostly flames burning in its eyes reflecting from the jagged, sharp fangs. It was flying directly at Rain, moments away from closing its jaw on her throat. She felt paralyzed by fear, desperately wishing to run, but unable to move. Was this how she was going to die? No. It couldn't be. But it was. Suddenly, a spark of a strange, dark emotion ignited in Rain's heart. Rain cried out that she refused to die, not like this. She was holding a sword, was she not? Even if that thing was going to devour her, Rain was determined to die fighting, just like she had been taught to. She was going to remain human, not a cowering animal only good enough to be the stronger beast's prey. She owed that much to her parents, at least. Knowing full well that her dull training sword was not going to stop a nightmare creature, Rain stubbornly made a motion to raise it. Even though her mind was panicked and her thoughts scattered, the body remembered countless hours of practice. Not that it was going to do her any good. The hound was already so close that she could see every harrowing detail of its hideous snout and frothing maw. There was no escape. Rain wailed that it was unfair, so unfair. This childish thought appeared in her mind, as it had undoubtedly appeared in the minds of countless people just before they were killed. And then something strange happened. Suddenly, two beautiful magenta lights ignited in the darkness to the side of the lunging creature. A moment later, a dark blade of a strange, stone-like sword flashed out of the shadows and easily sliced through the abomination's neck, separating its head from its torso. A round shield made of something that resembled stone then appeared and swatted the headless body away from Rain, not allowing even a drop of blood to fall on her. As she froze in shock, a graceful woman wearing menacing black armor stepped out of the darkness, two ruby flames burning behind the visor of her closed helmet. Rain had never seen someone so terrifying, yet so magnificent. The woman glanced at her with indifferent calmness, and then turned around to easily pierce another hound with her stone-like sword, then sever one more in half with a swift, vicious strike. It was as though the flesh of the abominations offered her no resistance. Rain breathed that she had just killed 3 nightmare creatures. And not only that, but she also killed them in the span of a second with a confident, relaxed ease. Rain whispered, wondering who she was. Before Rain knew what she was doing, she heard herself asking in a small voice who the woman was. The beautiful knight did not answer and simply stood between the children and the advancing monsters, her back straight and solid like a stone wall. Rain stared at that back, feeling as though nothing was going to get past this frightening, taciturn warrior. A burning desire suddenly appeared in her heart. She didn't know whether the menacing Black Knight was a human, a spirit, or a strange nightmare creature, but she knew one thing. She wanted to be strong someday, strong like her. In front of the gate, Sonny was slowly suffocating in the iron grip of the fallen tyrant. He was being brought closer and closer to the 3 burning red eyes, and as he did, it felt as though life itself was being sucked out of him, his mind balancing on the verge of breaking apart. Sonny gasped, demanding to know what the hell was happening. There had to be something that he could do, some trick he could employ to wrestle free, a memory he could summon, an enchantment he could activate. But no matter how hard he tried, nothing worked. Sonny's vision was slowly starting to grow dark. Sonny choked out that he needed to do something, his voice desperate and strained. He could have summoned the cruel sight if his hands were free, but they were not. He could have turned the mantle of the underworld too heavy for the tyrant to lift, but it was already as heavy as the feather of truth allowed, weighing as much as a small mountain. What else was there in his arsenal? Sonny was almost ready to panic, and then a subtle change suddenly happened to the world. It was easily missed or discarded, more of a feeling than an actual shift. Sonny only noticed it because it felt strangely familiar. It felt as though the whole world suddenly became colder by a couple of degrees. But why would it? Before he could properly consider the meaning of the subtle change, though, something flashed through the air, and suddenly, Sonny could breathe again. He could do so because the hand holding him wasn't connected to the tyrant's body anymore, the arm severed cleanly at the elbow. Sonny breathed a stunned question. Sonny fell to the ground and rolled away as a fountain of seething blood shot out of the stump that used to be a Wraith chieftain's arm, evaporating and turning into a cloud of scorching red mist. Sonny gasped, asking what had just happened. Still reeling, he struggled to stand up and saw someone landing on a piece of rubble next to him. It was a beautiful woman who seemed to be in her late 20s. She was wearing a dark blue uniform with silver epaulets and leather boots, her short hair as black as a raven's feather, and her skin as white as snow. Her icy blue eyes were colder than the deepest reaches of a frozen hell. In her hand, the woman was holding a somber glaive. drops of boiling blood swiftly turning into ice on its slender blade. She looked like death herself. Sunny exclaimed that it was Master Jet. Indeed, it was Soul Reaper Jet. The cavalry had arrived. Sunny had never been that happy to see anyone in his entire life. Master Jet arrived just in the nick of time, saving him from having to regret the decision to send Saint to aid Rain. Not to mention that she was really pleasant to look at. More importantly, taking off a fallen tyrant's arm with one strike. Even for an ascended, this was an incredible feat. Tyrants were not creatures one usually dared to challenge alone. Instead, they were dreaded horrors that were capable of decimating whole cohorts of experienced, battle-hardened fighters. Masters rarely worked together, simply for the fact that there were too few of them and too much for each one to do. But facing a tyrant was one of the things that pushed them to band together. And even then, not everyone was guaranteed to return from the fight. Truly, Teacher Julius had not been exaggerating when he said that even saints were wary of Soul Reaper Jet. And yet, although her entrance was spectacular, would she be able to battle the tyrant and survive? Even though the chieftain was seriously wounded, that wound came from a surprise attack. Now that she lost the advantage, things could change really fast. As though answering his thoughts, Master Jet glanced at him. Despite the fact that they were surrounded by piles of corpses, the terrifying giant looming above them like an omen of doom, an unexpected smile suddenly appeared on her cold face. Jet remarked that it was a cool mask. With that, Soul Reaper sprung forward, turning into a blue blur. Her movements were so fast that Sunny had only been able to perceive them because he was an awakened, his senses vastly superior to that of a mundane human. Several things happened at the same time. The somber glaive flew away as it spun fast enough to appear as a blurry circle. It cut a bloody swath in the mass of abominations, eviscerating dozens in a matter of a second as it moved in a wide arc. At the same time, Master Jet streaked across the bloodied, broken asphalt and appeared behind the tyrant, then caught the glaive and immediately lunged forward in a devastating thrust. The chieftain was much faster, though. His spear seemed to almost teleport into the path of the glaive he positioned for an indomitable block. Something weird happened then. Master Jet's weapons suddenly turned ghostly and eerily luminous, and simply passed through the shaft to the spear, then effortlessly pierced. No, phased through the creature's armor, burying itself deep in his chest, right where one of the soul cores should have been. Sunny breathed a stunned question. Things didn't go as she had planned, though. Sunny got that suspicion because of a slight frown that appeared on Jet's face, and the fact that the tyrant did not slow down even one bit. Instead of having its soul damaged or one of his cores destroyed, the bastard simply took a step forward and raised his spear, which suddenly ignited with blinding light and flooded the area directly in front of the gate with menacing red radiance. Sunny sighed. Sunny muttered that that was his cue to get the hell out of there. This was not a battle he could handle, at least not in his current state. Master Jet seemed to have the situation under control. Even if she ended up as no match for the Barrow chieftain, she would at least be able to stall him until the rest of the government forces arrived. Sunny, on the other hand, would probably just be erased from existence by the destructive fallout their battle was bound to produce. Since Saint was doing fine in the gymnasium of the school, protecting both the children and the teachers, he didn't have to worry about Rain as well. All that was left was to get more shadow fragments and, hopefully, an additional memory or two while Soul Reaper was doing the heavy lifting, of course. Sunny mused that it was a good thing she arrived way faster than 13 minutes, what an exemplary employee, and that he was starting to understand why Master Jet always seemed sleep-deprived. He hoped the government gave her a raise. With that, Sunny picked himself off the ground and used Shadow Step to appear near the 6 awakened, who were on the verge of being overrun by the advancing nightmare creatures. Honestly, it was a miracle that all of them were still alive. Summoning the Odachi once again, Sunny cut down a hunter who had been aiming at the familiar young woman with a bow and gave her a cursory glance. Something exploded behind him, in the direction where Master Jet was fighting the tyrant, painting him with shades of deep red.
Yeah, Lord Mongrel, what should we do?
Wasn't that obvious? Sunny bellowed for them to run, the idiots. Grimacing behind the fearsome black mask, Sonny opened his mouth and said, his voice full of resentment toward the fact that he had to tell such an obnoxious lie that they should stand and fight. The girl stared at him, a sudden expression of shame clearly written on her face. She murmured that, of course, that was what an awakened ought to do. Suppressing an infuriated groan, Sonny strained his aching muscle and raised the Soul Serpent. He grumbled that it was a joke, and he better not see that quote going viral on the network. In the end, the gate was contained with, miraculously, no civilian casualties. Soon after Master Jet appeared, the government strike force finally arrived. Several swift air carriers descended from the skies in the howling of jet engines, and dozens of Awakened jumped down, all clad in high-quality armor and wielding powerful weapons. Almost at the same time, armored vehicles appeared on the road and opened fire on the mass of nightmare creatures. Their spell-tech cannons managing to obliterate the weaker abominations and herd the more powerful ones away from the city streets. Operated by mundane humans, these machines were meant to control the battlefield and make it easier for the Awakened to eliminate those creatures too tough for human weapons to destroy reliably. More cohorts, machines, and mundane soldiers followed. Master Jet, unbelievably, ended up actually killing the tyrant. The break in their battle came when she suddenly shifted from attacking the chieftain himself to aiming for the three-eyed skull he wore as a helmet. As soon as she managed to crack the skull, the red flames burning in the eyes of the wraiths were extinguished, leaving them disoriented and weakened. Many simply fell to the ground, losing their perverted unlives. The tyrant staggered, and then collapsed in a heap of rotten fur and desiccated flesh, sending a tremor through the bloody battlefield. This time, he was truly and utterly dead. After that, the scales of the battle tilted drastically in the favor of humans. Noticing a dedicated team of Awakened enter the school to secure the students, Sonny dismissed Saint and glanced at the scene of slaughter one last time. His heart was in agony, not because of the havoc and destruction that seemed to envelop once peaceful streets, but because of all the soul shards and contribution points he was going to miss out on. Such cruelty. Such injustice. Well, at least he received a very large number of shadow fragments, several memories, and even learned a new, profound, and deviously deadly battle style. This thought did not console him very much, though. Almost on the verge of crying, Sonny sighed and dissolved into the shadows. Without saying anything or demanding any credit, Mongrel was gone just as suddenly as he had appeared. All that was left behind were scores of dead nightmare creatures and the memories of those who saw him fight. And some time later, in a dark and empty alley, Awakened Sunless, who avoided the summons to defend the gate, walked toward an especially remote corner and bent down to pick up the covetous coffer, which was furtively looking out from behind a big garbage container. Taking his communicator, Sonny patted the box on the lid and dismissed it, then stared at the screen with a dark expression. A heavy sigh escaped from his lips. Sonny sighed contentedly that it was good to be a coward. By the time Sonny limped back to his house, the news of the gate opening in a prestigious district of the city was all over the network. Luckily, the school Rain attended was situated really far away from where both of them lived. None of the mayhem had reached the terrace neighborhood, leaving it as quiet and peaceful as ever. It was a bit strange to see that nothing had changed here despite the fact that mere tens of minutes of riding the train away. The bodies of numerous nightmare creatures littered the ground. Life simply went on. Well, it wasn't really that surprising. If people reacted strongly to every instance of a gate appearing, nothing would ever get done and everyone would live every day of their lives in fear. So, those not affected by the disaster directly did not allow it to disrupt their moods or routines. People could get accustomed to anything. Even the constant possibility of terrifying monsters suddenly coming out of an infernal rift in reality on their street. As long as important parts of city infrastructure weren't damaged, no one was going to care that much. And even if they were, citizens knew how to adapt. Public transport would be rerouted. Power outages would be dealt with by switching to autonomous generators or simply using candles and so on. The gate was contained. The impact area was already being cleaned by the government workers. When tomorrow came, The cafe Sunny had visited would be open again, as though nothing happened. Life would return to normal, and those who had experienced the terror of the gate firsthand would go on, silently bearing an invisible scar on their heart. But that was all right, too. Collecting scars was something that everyone who lived in this world had to do as they matured. This was the reality of the nightmare spell.
Why am I suddenly in a philosophical mood?
Sunny shook his head, then scoffed and opened the door of his home. Effie was in the living room, taking advantage of the state-of-the-art entertainment system Sunny had bought and paid for. When she saw him, a surprised expression appeared on her face.
Gods, what happened to you? Did a piano fall on your heads?
Sunny sighed, then glanced at her darkly and muttered that it was a strange question.
No, a gate fell on my head, sort of. Damn thing opened right near a cafe I sometimes visit. They sell incredible pastries, so good news is I managed to finish my pastry before getting the hell out.
Effie gave him a shocked look.
Goodness, you were near that mess. I heard that the government barely gave people time to evacuate this time.
Sunny shrugged and replied that yes, he had been near. The young woman stared at him, then grinned.
So, how many contribution points did you get? Enough to upgrade the entertainment system, maybe. You won't believe the quality of the haptic interfaces these days. I mean, you don't have to if you don't want to, of course. Just something to consider.
He gritted his teeth and let out a frustrated sigh.
Nuns, I didn't get anything okay.
Effie blinked a couple of times, then looked at him with a bit of disappointment.
Well, no need to get emotional. There's no shame in avoiding such fights. Everyone wants to live, you know.
Sunny waved a hand dejectedly, then turned around.
Yeah, I know. Anyway, I'll go take a bath, have fun.
Leaving his guest, well, more like an uninvited housemate, alone in the living room, Sunny went away and prepared an ice bath for himself. When he lowered his aching body into the cold water and endured the initial shock, a pleasant numbness enveloped him. Sunny glanced at the tapestry of bruises covering his skin and sighed.
Can I still be considered pale if I am mostly black and purple? Gee, I always wanted to stop being pasty, but not like this.
He closed his eyes and relaxed, enjoying the ice bath. None of his wounds were serious enough to really worry about, so he just had to wait for his body to heal itself. That was going to take a few days, which Sunny was fully intending to spend lazing about and doing nothing. Wasn't that the dream? After a while, he got a bit bored and decided to do something productive. He could either check on how much he had gained in the bloody battle or see if someone had come close to connecting him to Mongrel. Sunny thought for a few moments, then reached for his communicator.
Let's see the extent of the damage first.
A few moments later, a low groan escaped from his lips. Sunny cursed under his breath, muttering about it being for the spell's sake. The headlines blared from the screen. One announced that Mongrel had returned to single-handedly contain a Category 2 gate. Another proclaimed that his heroic stand had been caught on camera in the shadow of a lord. A third asked who this courageous hero was that everyone was talking about, promising that the answer might shock you. A fourth declared that they had known it all along, and that Mongrel was confirmed to be a woman. And a fifth urged readers to stand and fight, calling Mongrel's words something to live by, and praising the hero for refusing to give up. Sunny stared at the screen of the communicator with resentment, then suppressed the desire to crush it in his fist and demanded to know what was wrong with people. Apparently, a bit of his recent performance had been caught on tape. The shockwave of an opening gate was supposed to mess with electronics, but one camera had miraculously survived. The image was really grainy and stuttered every few seconds. But he could make out a dark figure moving through the mass of nightmare creatures, the Soul Serpent flashing through the bloody mist, its blade surrounded by a halo of black radiance. The battle style of the Barrow Wraiths and his need to spill as much blood as possible added an extra layer of brutality to the recording, making him seem like a demon that had escaped from some lightless hell. Sunny grimaced as though in pain and tentatively looked down on the views counter beneath the video. When he saw it, the communicator slipped from his hand and fell into the water. Good thing it was waterproof.
Damnation, well, you've done it now, fool. Congratulations, you've gone mainstream.
The article began by reporting that a terrible tragedy had almost happened in a peaceful and prosperous part of the city. It was a day like any other, until a sudden notification alerted the citizens that a gate was about to open nearby. With no time to evacuate, numerous people were going to die. But then, according to the article, a courageous awakened had placed himself in the way of nightmare creatures, holding off the entire advancing horde by himself and refusing to give ground until the government forces arrived. This hero then disappeared without demanding any reward, not leaving even his name behind, only scores of slaughtered monsters and numerous saved lives. The article asked who this brave and modest savior was, where he had come from, and what his true identity might be, suggesting that some readers might recognize him as the viral dreamscape sensation, Mongrel. Sunny stared at the communicator, which had water dripping from it, with a dark expression on his face.
An official newspaper. This is a damn published article, not a random network thread.
Previously, Sunny had only gone really viral among the people who were interested in the dreamscape and dueling. Even though the recording of his performance in the Colosseum reached a wider audience, most of the people who had seen it did not pay Mongrel a lot of attention, since they didn't understand the details of his achievements. This one, however, this one was different. Everyone could relate to a gate opening and knew how terrifying and calamitous such an event could be. So, the new video showed Mongrel in a context that revealed just how bizarre and exceptional his deeds were to everyone. Add to that the fact that the combination of the mantle of the Underworld, the Soul Serpent, and Weaver's mask looked really striking and menacing, and that, miraculously, no civilian had died despite the late warning by the government, and Sunny found himself in a sea of trouble. Suddenly, he was happy with the fact that he had not been able to augment himself with both of his shadows. At least his physical prowess did not seem too out of the realm of humanly possible, or rather, possible for an awakened. The other good news was that there, thankfully, was no recording of Saint. The cameras in the school had been properly damaged, and for that reason people only knew of her by verbal description, which caused its own share of problems because of how similar the mantle of the Underworld was to her armor. Due to that, and the nature of how rumors distorted the truth the more they were shared, soon, many people were convinced that Mongrel had protected the children in the school personally, and that led some to become convinced that Mongrel was a woman. Sunny tiredly covered his face with a hand. His worst fears had not come true, though. Despite the fact that the recording showed him using Shadow Step, no one learned the true nature of his ability from the grainy image. And no one connected him and Mongrel together. Maybe because of the ridiculous way a song of light and darkness portrayed Sunny, but no one even tried to assume that Changing Star's bumbling sidekick was actually the dark, deadly, demonic swordsman Mongrel. Instead, there were countless discussions like this. A user called Mongrel Seeker posted new information on Mongrel's aspect, claiming that the video clearly showed his ability was actually spatial sorcery, not physical enhancement or perception as previously thought. Another user called Spirit of the Colosseum marveled at the implication that Mongrel had not even used his aspect in the Dreamscape duels, meaning it was all pure skill. An anonymous user pointed out that they meant her aspect. Mongrel Seeker shot back that Lord Mongrel was not a her. The anonymous user countered with Lady Mongrel. Spirit of the Colosseum suggested pinging Mongrel's son, saying he should know who his dad was, and the anonymous user asked if they meant his mom. Sunny let out an infuriated sigh.
Well, at least no one is mentioning me. If you think about it, the more people think that Mongrel is a lady, the better. Yes, this is good. No, seriously, so good. Curse them all.
And of course, there were a lot of nonsensical threads assigning some deep and profound meaning to every stupid lie he had said. One quoted him saying he was just a human, and spun it into a reminder that there are no mundanes or awakened, only humans and the nightmare creatures, and that everyone is equal before the spell. Another quoted his command to make them bleed. Marveling at how cool it sounded, and how repaying each drop of human blood the nightmare creatures spill with a river of their own was all anyone could do. But mostly, it was the damned idiotic advice he had given to one of the 6 awakened near the end. Countless people were repeating, praising, and adding the words stand and fight to their bios, calling them a simple but all-encompassing adage and declaring Lord Mongrel a true awakened. Everywhere he looked, it was the same 3 words. So many people were repeating, praising, and adding them to their bios that Sonny wanted to vomit. He muttered under his breath, wondering what was happening. As people continued to watch the recording and discuss it, the truth got hazier and hazier. Pretty soon, everyone seemed to have forgotten that Sonny had not actually contained the gate by his lonesome self. No one mentioned Master Jet, who had literally saved his skin and took on the Guardian alone, eventually defeating the fallen tyrant without a cohort of masters supporting her. No one mentioned the 6 awakened who had helped him, and a literal army of government soldiers who had done the really heavy lifting and wiped out the entire horde, which he had only stalled until their arrival. It was all Mongrel and his courageous, selfless, heroic stand against numerous nightmare creatures, as though he was some sort of a fearless, slaughtering demigod.
It's almost like no one even cares about the truth.
Sonny threw the communicator on the pile of clothes and closed his eyes in frustration. It was a very strange sentiment. The irony was not lost on him one bit.
Curses, who knew that I would be lamenting a lack of truth one day? Me, of all people, what is this situation?
Indeed, making Sonny care about the truth was not easy. It was no simple trick. Eventually, Sonny climbed out of the bath, dressed himself, and moved to the kitchen to make himself something to eat. After the intense gauntlet of the gate battle, he was hungry like a wolf. Ravenous, really. Cooking calmed him down a little, and the pleasant smell made his mood a bit better. Now that Sonny had some time to think, he saw the whole situation in a new light. Yes, his hope for Mongrel to be forgotten was utterly shattered. But there was a bright side to this fiasco. Now that he had completely failed to keep a low profile, there was no more reason to, which meant that he could resume practicing shadow dance in the dreamscape and hopefully master its second step before winter came. He just had to rethink how he viewed the persona of Mongrel. Initially, Sonny had planned for it to be unseen and anonymous, merely a camouflage he would put on to accomplish certain things, things that were inconvenient or too dangerous to be tied to his own name. Well, that ship had sailed. He was pretty sure that from now on, anything having to do with Mongrel was going to be at the center of people's attention. But that wasn't necessarily bad. There were ways to remain unseen even in the spotlight. In fact, sometimes it was easier. All magicians knew that the secret to pulling off a flawless trick was not to become invisible, but to direct the crowd's attention towards something eye-catching and away from the hand performing the switch. Sonny was not a magician, but he did consider himself to be an experienced cheat. The principle was more or less the same. So if he played his cards right, the more attention Mongrel received, the more freedom he would have to move unseen in the shadows, accomplishing his goals under everyone's noses, with no one being the wiser.
Maybe.
Such a thing was hard to accomplish and hid more risk, but also promised a greater reward. So, not all was lost. Plus, he had protected Rain. That was the only thing that really mattered. Everything else paled in comparison. Sonny finished his decadently generous dinner and moved to the porch. Sitting in the shade, he relaxed, grimaced a little due to pain, and took a sip of tea. He was suddenly in a great mood. And why wouldn't he be? It was finally time to take a look at his spoils. The battle might have been hard and had almost cost him his life, but he had not fought for nothing. Summoning the runes, Sonny glanced at the familiar string of them and smiled. Shadow fragments, 1814-2000. He breathed the word incredible. In just 10 or so minutes, Sonny had gained more shadow fragments than he usually did in weeks, from what Sonny remembered. He slaughtered almost 100 nightmare creatures in front of the gate. Granted, Most of them were of the dormant rank and had not contributed any fragments to his growing cores, but still, it was a monumental accomplishment. It made him think back to the first abomination he had ever slain, the Mountain King's larva. How tense and terrifying that fight had been, how convinced he was that the perverse creature would kill him. Who would have thought that one day in a not-too-distant future, he would be able to slaughter 100 nightmare creatures of similar and greater power, without being torn to pieces. Sunny had come so far. Lowering his gaze, he glanced at the runes describing his memories and couldn't contain a delighted grin. He murmured that he had been so lucky today, without even counting the obsidian spear he had gotten and then swiftly lost to the tyrant. There were 6 new memories in his arsenal, most of them of the awakened rank. Sunny studied them for a bit, and coming to the conclusion that none were better than his current ones or performed something he wasn't already capable of, dove into the soul sea. He fed the memories to Saint and looked at her runes, satisfied with what he saw. Shadow fragments, 179-200. He whispered that they were so close. At this rate, he would probably be able to reach the full 200 before having to go into battle with the vine creature inhabiting the wreck of the ancient ship. If Saint grew even more powerful before then, her presence was going to change a lot of things. Sunny drank his tea in the peaceful silence of the terrace district, grimacing from time to time because of the pain in his bruised body. But even the pain couldn't spoil his mood. He sighed contentedly and murmured that today had been a good day. He watched Rain be brought home in a PTV, made sure that she was fine. Well, as fine as a young girl could be after experiencing a close brush with an opening gate, and went inside. He was due for some well-deserved rest. In the evening, when the sun hid behind the horizon and the street lamps were flooding the city with pale white light, Sunny was resting in his living room, doing nothing in particular. He was lazily scrolling through the pages of a popular webtoon and appreciating the twists and turns of its simple story.
Crazy, do people really think about such stuff?
His thoughts were suddenly interrupted by a strange sound. It took Sunny a couple of seconds to realize what it was, since he had never heard it in this house before. Someone was knocking on the door. He muttered under his breath, wondering what the hell it was. Who could be visiting him at this late hour? Putting the communicator away, Sunny sent his shadow to take a look and scratch the back of his head in confusion. Standing on his porch was none other than Rain, wearing her cozy home clothes and looking uncharacteristically nervous. He wondered what she was doing here. For a moment, Sunny considered pretending that he wasn't home, but then sighed and stood up. There was no point in hiding, since they literally lived almost next to each other. Walking over to the door, he lingered a second or two, made sure that none of his bruises were showing, and then opened it. He called out, asking what was up. Not knowing that Sunny had already seen how nervous she was, Rain pretended to be calm and gave him a polite smile.
Hey, Sunny, the food container. Mom wants it back.
He stared at her for a couple of seconds. Sunny said he would be right back and told her to wait here. He walked to the kitchen, retrieved the container from the dishwasher machine, and returned to the porch.
Here, tell your mom that her cooking is delicious. We really enjoyed it.
Rain took the container but didn't leave. Instead, she just stood there silently, looking at him with a tense expression. Sunny frowned and started to ask if he could help her, but at that exact moment, she suddenly blurted out,
I know who you are.
If Sunny had a drink in hand, he would undoubtedly do a spit take. He blurted out a stunned what? As his heart almost stopped, he looked at Rain with a deadpan expression. Maintaining it cost him a lot, though. In a panic, he wondered what she thought she knew.
Well, of course you know who I am. I introduced myself when we met for the first time, didn't I?
She opened her mouth, then closed it again. After a bit of an awkward pause, Rain said,
No, I mean I know that you are an awakened.
Sunny blinked a couple of times, but before he could come up with something to say, she hurriedly continued.
Sorry, it's just, my dad works for the government, so he knows such things. You are so young with no parents, but are able to afford a house in this neighborhood. Plus, you don't go to a university or to work. So, you are an awakened, aren't you?
Solid reasoning. He hesitated, then simply shrugged.
Sure, not like it's a big secret anyway.
Rain remained silent for a few moments, and then asked.
Are you any good?
Sunny stared at her for a bit. Then, a grin slowly appeared on his face.
Me? Oh, the best of the best. Probably the strongest awakened in the world, really. No one else can even compare.
A slight scowl appeared on Rain's face.
I'm being serious. Are you any good or not?
Sunny lingered for a moment, then sighed.
Yeah, I'm all right. Why are you asking?
Rain looked at him for a while as though gathering courage. Then she clenched her fists and blurted.
Gan, can you train me?
Sunny stared at her, dumbfounded.
Well, I'll be damned. That took an unexpected turn. Train her.
Wasn't that exactly what he wanted? It was, but wasn't it also exactly what he wanted to avoid? Yes, it was that too. Sunny was in a strange predicament. The solution to the problem that had tormented him for many months had suddenly fallen right into his lap out of nowhere, but to make use of it, he had to do something that went against all his previous reservations. He didn't want Rain to be connected to him in any way. If Sunny was honest with himself, he had to admit that he was drawn to her, or rather, to the faint. Half-forgotten memories of a different, happy time that she represented. His desire to reconnect with Rain was both selfish and misguided, since he knew that nothing was going to bring those memories back to life. And if Sunny was really honest, he had to admit that deep down, he harbored a lot of resentment toward her too, for having a loving family while he had none, for being fine, for not needing him at all. What a mess of emotions that was. And if there was one thing Sunny was really bad at dealing with, it was his feelings. For him, fighting hordes of nightmare creatures was much easier. And then, as though his inner turmoil was not enough, there were external forces at play too. There was his fated attribute, the strange connection he had to Weaver, and Nephi's with her murderous feud against the Sovereigns and the inhuman will to see the spell destroyed. The more he and Rain were connected, the higher were the chances of her being implicated in all this. But maybe, as long as they only had a shallow connection between a kid from an affluent family and her hired tutor, things weren't going to get out of hand. He also had to consider that the threat posed by a potential first nightmare was much greater than that of being superficially tied to him. After all, Sunny had not done anything to attract the really dangerous kind of attention, or rather, had not been caught doing anything like that yet. While he was torn between these conflicting thoughts, Rain waited patiently, and then, misjudging his silence, said,
Oh, of course I will pay you. I have some money saved for a trip, and, well, I can also talk to my parents. It's just that you're the only awakened I know, apart from my combat instructor in school.
Sunny looked at her, a deep frown on his face. Eventually he asked,
What brought upon this conversation? Why do you suddenly want someone to train you? You said it yourself, you already have a combat instructor. I thought you rich kids get taught everything you need in school.
Rain suddenly grew quiet and looked away. After a while she said,
That you probably haven't heard, but there was a gate that opened near my school today. Many people almost died. I saw a real nightmare creature even. It was this close to me. An awaken like you won't probably understand how it feels, right? Oh, sorry, what am I saying? Of course you'd understand. I mean, what I meant to say is that I was absolutely powerless, and that was not a nice feeling. Not a nice feeling at all.
She glanced at him and said with a suddenly serious voice,
So I want to become strong, really strong enough to never feel that way again.
Sunny almost laughed.
Oh, what irony. Here we are so different and in such different situations, but our desires are completely the same. Become stronger, so much stronger. As strong as one could possibly be.
Rain paused for a few moments and then added,
And what we are taught in school is not nearly enough. At least it wasn't today. Some of my classmates have private tutors that their parents hire for them. Real awakened fighters. But it's just a question of status to them. They don't really learn. Or if they do, I didn't see it make any difference when the nightmare creatures were trying to kill us.
Sunny smiled from the corner of his mouth.
That's because 1,000 hours of training will never be as impactful as one real fight. My own mentor told me that once.
He hesitated for a second and then sighed.
I myself was trained by a very special person, the best fighter I have ever met and probably ever will. The funny thing is, though I sort of swindled her into teaching me how to handle a sword, felt a little guilty about it ever since, so I guess it won't hurt to pay it forward and help someone like you out.
Sunny looked at Rain with a dark expression, realizing that he had already made a decision.
Ah, to hell with this. Why make things complicated when they are actually really simple?
He shook his head.
Be warned though, if you want me to train you, I will really train you. It's going to be hard as hell and hurt a lot. I don't want to hear any complaints or see you slacking off, understood?
Rain suddenly giggled. Sunny scowled and demanded to know what was so funny. She waved a hand.
Sorry, it's funny when you act all strict and serious because you know, are barely older than me. But I do understand. I'll work hard, I promise.
Sunny stared at her for a bit, then said in a low voice.
What do you mean, barely older than you? I'm ages older than you. Just half the crap I've seen would be enough for a few lifetimes of the likes of you.
Then he smiled menacingly and added,
Oh, and by the way, I also won't be cheap. I have mouths to feed, you know, that guest you've seen. I can't seem to get her to leave. There's also a stone-hearted beauty who always follows me around, and her diet is unreasonably expensive. But what can I do? Attracting women with terrifying appetites seems to be my curse.
He sighed, looked at Rain, and added,
But if you still didn't change your mind, then fine. I'll train you, Rain.
Somewhere far away, in the depths of an endless and inescapable nightmare, a blinding disk of an incandescent sun was bathing the dunes of a vast desert in a flood of immolating heat. The sands of the desert were flawlessly white, and the azure sky above them was deep and boundless like an ancient ocean, with not a single cloud blemishing its silken expanse. Being battered by the heat, a lone figure moved across the sand. It was a young woman with striking gray eyes. Her skin covered in terrible burns, her silver hair dirty with blood and surrounded by a radiant halo of reflected light. She wore charred remains of a shattered armor and wielded a broken sword, its silver blade fractured and ending in a jagged edge close to the hilt. The young woman walked forward, the trail of her footprints stretching far into the distance and disappearing over the horizon. To her left, there was nothing but an endless sea of white dunes. To her right, a line of black mountains eventually created a boundary for the scorching desert. Far ahead, there was a tree with scarlet leaves and a scattering of something that looked like pale fruit hanging from its wide branches. This was where Nephi's was headed. She had to reach the tree before the night came, or, no, it was better not to think of it. Her water had long run out, and the thirst was slowly taking hold of her mind. Her tortured body was a sea of pain, but she could still walk. She could still fight. She was still not willing to give up. After a while, the tree grew closer. Nephi stopped and stared at its white bark, its scarlet leaves, and the shapes she had thought were fruit. But they weren't. Instead, tens of thousands of skulls hung from the beautiful branches, fastened to them with glistening threads of black silk. A spring of water formed a clear pool in the shadow of the great tree, and on its bank, with his back to her, stood a figure clad in a strange, rusted armor. Nephi's whispered the question, wondering if it was a human. No, the figure was too tall to be one of her kind. As though hearing her thoughts, the creature turned around, revealing a desiccated face of a corpse, hollow eyes emanating ominous blue radiance, and 6 hands, each grasping the hilt of a weapon. 2 hands held long swords, their blades sharper than a razor and curved slightly. 2 hands held menacing twisted sickles, and the last 2 held a heavy scepter and a broken shield. The chest plate of the creature's rusted armor was shattered, revealing a harrowing wound beneath. Being consumed by thirst and exhaustion, Nephi's raised a hand as though begging the creature to stop, but of cause it didn't. With furious madness burning in its eyes, the abomination lunged at her, striking down with one of the sickles. It moved faster than lightning, sending a scarlet cloud of fallen leaves swirling into the air with a strong gust of wind. Taking a step back, Nephi's raised her broken sword to deflect the devastating strike, as though forgetting that it had no blade. At the last moment, though, a ray of pure sunlight appeared where the blade should have been and stopped the sickle from rending her flesh. Nephi swayed from the force of the impact, but remained standing. Her cracked lips opened, and a hoarse whisper escaped from them.
"Let us burn then. Let us burn together."
In the next moment, white flames ignited in her eyes. Her skin suddenly shone with pure radiance, which then became brighter and brighter, and then brighter still. Throwing the sickle away, she dodged two thrusting swords and danced around the armored giant, her blade of sunlight piercing the rusted armor with terrifying ease. The two of them fought in the shade of the ancient tree, thousands of skulls staring at their battle with empty eyes as they swayed in the wind. Nephi's was much slower and weaker than the six-armed demon, but her skill was flawless, inexplicable, and deadly. She moved with the flow of the battle as though it was her natural element, controlling its cadence with indifferent ease. Her flesh mended itself seconds after being torn, and the flames burning in her eyes only grew hotter. Deathly pale from the harrowing pain, her beautiful face grew colder and colder, becoming almost inhuman. Her sword of sunlight, meanwhile, left molten marks on the body of the ancient demon, and even though such wounds could never harm it, after a while, the creature suddenly staggered. Of course it did. That was a memory left behind by the nameless son of the forgotten shore, after all. Everything it touched was doomed to have its soul destroyed. Finally, Nephi's managed to find an opening and dashed forward, slashing upward with the nameless sun. The sunlight blade cut through the rusted armor and severed one of the demon's arms, then fell down and sliced through another. Before the creature could recover, she was already upon it. Nephi sidestepped a crushing blow of the heavy scepter and placed her hand on the demon's face. The creature froze, and then opened its mouth as though to scream. However, all that escaped from it were dancing tongues of white flame. As the pure radiance enveloping Neph's skin dimmed, it was as though the demon burned from within. Flaming fissures opened on its body, leaking pristine fire and radiating annihilating heat. His flesh boiled and blackened, and eventually, the blue shine of his eyes was replaced with blinding white light. And then that light was extinguished, leaving two dark, charred holes behind. Nephi's let go of the creature's face and watched as its scorched body fell to the ground. She stared at it for a few moments and then indifferently turned away. Making a few steps forward, Nephi swayed and fell to her knees. Then, she reached into the pool with trembling hands, put her palms together, and brought a handful of cold, sweet water to her lips. Finally, her terrible thirst could be quenched. After drinking her fill, Nephi sat silently on the edge of the pool for a while, staring into the distance. Her eyes, however, were moving, as though reading an invisible book that floated in the air above the calm waters. Some time later, a pale shadow of a smile touched her lips.
"That guy, he did something crazy again, didn't he?"
She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. Nephi's murmured, wondering how he was so fast. In the past months, years, lifetimes, spent traversing the dream realm surrounded by nothing except for pain and bloodshed, Nephi's had started doubting the memories of her previous life. Sometimes all of it seemed like something that she had simply imagined. A bittersweet dream she had invented to escape from the horrors of the real world. This world, the world of never-ending nightmares. The change of the runes describing Sunny was the only connection she had left to the actual reality. Perhaps it was the only thing keeping her sane, even if the things she saw in the shimmering runes were sometimes hard to believe. The impossible lineage that should not have existed, the divine memory of the seventh rank, the strange essence of his soul, the true nature of the taciturn stone demon, and of course of his flaw. It seemed that Sunny had much more secrets than Nephi's had suspected. With that knowledge, many things made much more sense now, but at the same time, many others seemed much more incredible. Well, it was not like she didn't have secrets of her own. And anyway, it was all in the past. Everything was in the past. All that remained was the future. She did hope that he was doing well, though out there in the real world, with Cassie. Looking up from the water, Nephi shifted her gaze to the ancient tree and saw two weathered skeletons cruelly nailed to its white bark. Both stared at her with empty eyes, their teeth bared in eternal grins. After some time, one of the skeletons spoke, remarking on how pleasant it must be to look at him. The other grated its teeth and let out a creaky growl, then strained, trying to wrestle free of the large silver nails impaling it to the tree. However, no matter how furiously it struggled, the nails held true. Nephi looked at the skeletons with a calm expression, no emotion reflecting in her cold, gray eyes. The first skeleton spoke again, asking if that was living blood he smelled, and remarking on what terrible sins she must have committed to be cast into this hell alive, calling it too harsh a punishment even for a revolting Nephilim like her. Finally, she opened her mouth and said hoarsely, in a voice of a person who had almost forgotten how to speak,
What language do you use?
The skeleton laughed, then told her it was the only language there was in this place, and asked if she wished to learn it. Nephi remained silent for a long time, and then said,
I seek a way back to the waking world. Do you know how to escape this place?
The skeleton stared at her with a grin and asked what the waking world was. The second skeleton suddenly spoke, his voice deep and full of rage, demanding whether the other could not smell the stench of a demon on this abominable thing, declaring that she was one of weavers, and calling the first skeleton a fool. The first skeleton turned its skull a little, and then asked if that was so, remarking that in that case she would not find guides better than the two of them, and offering to lead her wherever she wanted if she would just take them off the damned tree. Nephi stared at them for a while, then turned away. She asked that she didn't need two guides and asked which one she should pick. The second skeleton strained to free himself again, and then roared, declaring himself Azarax the Mighty, the plague of steel, king of kings, conqueror of 100 thrones. He demanded that she choose him, promising to guide her to the shores of the underworld and through its dark expanse, back to the world of the living, and warning that she would need a powerful guide if she wished to escape. She spared him a glance, then said to the other one, asking what about him. The first skeleton answered in an aloof tone, saying that he was no one, just a humble slave. Nephi lingered for a bit. Finally, she asked why the two of them were nailed to this tree. The skeleton who had called himself Azarax growled, demanding to know if she did not know where she was. He declared that he was there because he had led his armies into the Great War, slaughtered a myriad of souls, and was punished for his strength and his pride. She shifted her gaze to the other one. The first skeleton answered succinctly that he had angered the gods. Nephi tilted her head a little and asked how. The skeleton sighed with regret, then told her that if she must know, he had slit a god's throat. He remarked that one could say it was a misunderstanding, and asked whether there had really been a need to be so petty. The sun was already falling behind the horizon, and chilling cold was spreading across the white desert. Nephi summoned her white cloak and wrapped herself in it, shivering. Soon night descended upon the world, revealing a myriad of bright stars. As it did, the sand moved, and slowly, countless figures rose from beneath it. All of them were corpses with no flesh remaining of their perfectly black bones, some of creatures that resembled humans, some of towering giants, and some of beings who were too strange and terrifying to describe. In a clamor of rusted armor and a litany of howls, the hordes of abominations clashed against each other, continuing their terrible battle even in death. Nephi moved closer to the tree, which somehow remained an isle of calm in the sea of terror, and looked at the first skeleton.
You remind me of someone I knew. Come morning, I will take you off the tree. To guide me, though.
The skeleton cackled and agreed, calling her a vile creature and saying that even though she was revolting, he would keep his promise. Nephi grinned and asked what she should call him then. The skeleton remained silent for a bit, then mused about a name, saying he used to have one of those before and wondering what it was. He moved its jaw a little and then said. The skeleton gave the name Uris of the Nine. As waves of summer heat assaulted the city, Its concrete and alloy jungle had turned into a sweltering oven. The air filtration systems were running without pause to save the people from suffocating in the clouds of pollutants, and in poorer districts, water had to be rationed because of the draft. Luckily, none of that touched the peaceful terrace neighborhood. Here, people leisurely enjoyed the warm weather in the cool shade of the tall trees when they had free time, had unlimited access to fresh water and delightfully cold drinks, and lived their lives seemingly without a care in the world. Sonny was constantly surprised to find himself among these fortunate and prosperous people. For the past month, his life was very busy, but without any distress. He had been steadily working toward his various goals, slowly making progress toward each. His shadow fragments were nearing full saturation, and so were Saints. He had returned to the dreamscape and participated in countless duels in the professional arenas, where the fighters were much more capable and gave him the opportunity to witness and comprehend many different battle styles. As the result, Sonny was able to further develop shadow dance, making his mastery of it much more solid. The prince of the underworld enchantment of the Mantle was now also very different from how it had been before, even if he wasn't going to reach the mark. 6,000 defeated opponents, anytime soon, or even a third of it, he was still making consistent progress. The counter already showed 1579 6,000. The drawback, of course, was that with each day he went without losing a fight, Mongrel received more and more praise and attention. These days, each of his duels gathered an audience as large as that of the top Dreamscape broadcasters, especially because some sort of a yearly tournament seemed to be approaching. Mongrel's fans, however, were doomed to be bitterly disappointed. Sonny had no plans of participating in a foolish imaginary competition. He didn't care about fame and recognition, and was too busy to even spare it a thought. Apart from practicing shadow dance, he also continued training with Effie and Saint, slowly bringing his mastery of the spear close to that of his knowledge of the sword. He also had to run the brilliant Emporium, which was quickly blossoming into an actual enterprise thanks to Aiko's management and hard work. And of course, he had been training Rain. She was currently in his living room, staring at him with outrage and exclaiming that she couldn't believe it.
Sure, what seems to be the problem?
Rain opened her mouth, then shook her head.
Listen, Sonny, I understand that you are the teacher, I really do. But it has already been a month, and all you taught me were wilderness survival lessons. And one, only one, strike which I had repeated thousands of times already. When I asked you to train me, I thought.
Sonny grinned.
You thought what? That I will teach you how to decimate nightmare creatures and bring all your enemies to their knees.
She coughed in embarrassment, then admitted in a small voice that yes, that was what she had thought. He shrugged.
But that is exactly what I am teaching you. Who do you think survives in the dream realm? The best swordsman, the strongest fighter? No, you need to be alive to fight a nightmare creature, and for that you need to know how to find food, water, how to read tracks and move through the environment without letting it kill you. And it will try to kill you, believe me.
He paused, then added.
Yes, they taught you the basics in school, but not nearly enough. You want to live long enough to become strong, then this is step one.
Rain let out a long sigh and then looked at Effie for support. The huntress was currently balancing in her wheelchair with a bored expression on her face, waiting at the door for some snacks she had ordered to arrive.
Oh what? Listen to Sonny, kid. He might look like a wet weasel, but this guy knows his stuff. The things he lived through are simply beyond reason. Honestly, if he had any shame, he would be dead.
Sonny spared her a dark glance and muttered a dry thanks. Rain frowned, accepting her defeat. A few moments later, she suddenly asked what step 2 was. He raised an eyebrow and asked what she meant. She repeated that he had said learning to navigate the environment without dying was step 1, and asked what step 2 was. Sonny looked at her for a few moments, then said,
It's about your mindset. You're not ready for step 2 yet, though. We'll get to it when the time is right.
For someone like Rain, that step was going to be the hardest. She didn't really have an aptitude for violence, yet because her life so far had been nice and soft, but she would have to not only come to terms with violence, but also adopt it into the very core of her being, make it one of the cornerstones of herself. That was the only way to survive the spell. Ironically, for Sunny, that step had been the easiest. In fact, he had made it long before his first nightmare. Long before the spell even knew of his existence. Rain stared at him with disappointment, then sighed and said quietly that she just wanted to be strong like her. He blinked a couple of times and asked, "Like who?" Rain suddenly smiled.
The awakened who saved me. She is so amazing, so strong, so beautiful. A true warrior, not someone like you.
Suddenly, a mortified expression replaced her wistful smile.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean it like that. You are great too, Sunny, I'm sure. Just not on her level.
Sunny stared at her for a bit, then said in a strange tone,
Sure, no offense taken. Not everyone is made to be a true warrior, that's right.
He wanted to say something else, but at that moment, his communicator suddenly rang, announcing an incoming call. Sunny frowned and wondered who it might be. Very few people ever called him. Looking at the screen, he suddenly felt a bit cold. It was the Sour Reaper herself, Ascended Jet. Sunny stammered in disbelief, wondering why she was calling him. Sunny hesitated for a couple of moments, then answered the call and said yes, asking if it was Master Jet. The familiar voice, as relaxed as ever, came out of the speaker.
Oh, hey there, awakened sunless. Are you free right now?
He wondered what she wanted, then glanced at Rain, thought for a bit, and said cautiously that he was sort of free, asking why. For a few moments, there was nothing but static and the sound of a PTV moving coming out of the communicator. Then, Master Jet asked,
Is mind lending me a hand?
A strange expression appeared on Sunny's face.
Lend her a hand, me. Why would a master need help from an awakened?
Meanwhile, Master Jet added,
You'll be generously rewarded, of course. Well, I can't guarantee the generous part, really, but there will definitely be a reward.
His eyes gleamed and he asked what kind of reward, really. She chuckled.
A fair share of contribution points. Enough to exchange for a decent memory, at least. Plus, didn't you say that you owe me a favor?
That did not sound bad at all. Saint was on the verge of reaching the coveted 200-200 status and was currently just a few shadow fragments away from it. However, Sunny couldn't really agree to the proposal without knowing what exactly she expected him to do. Or could he? Master Jet was one of the two Ascended he knew and his only contact to the government. This was a relationship worth maintaining, which meant that it wasn't wise to refuse her request for assistance. Plus, Sunny quite liked her and also owed her a lot, even before she had saved him during the gate battle. They were both from the outskirts and had a rather good rapport. They had a connection. He lingered for a moment and then agreed, saying all right, no problem, he would do it. Master Jet answered with satisfaction in her voice.
Good, I'll come pick you up then.
Sunny glanced around, evaluating how presentable his living room was. He was suddenly a bit nervous.
What the hell? What are you nervous for, fool?
He cleared his throat and then said,
Sure, oh, wait, let me give you an address.
Master Jet laughed.
Gee, Sunny, I work for the government, remember? I know your address.
Before he could respond, the call was cut off. Sunny was left standing with a rather dumbfounded expression on his face.
And she knows, well, of course she knows. I wonder what else she knows.
Noticing the strange look on his face, Rain asked,
Did something bad happen?
Sunny sighed, then slowly shook his head.
No, nothing bad, just some business I have to deal with. Sorry, we'll have to continue the lesson next time.
She stared at him for a moment, then shrugged.
Well, all right, I'll practice back home then.
With that, Rain picked up her training sword, said goodbye to Effie, and left. A couple of seconds after the door closed behind her, the former huntress gave him an amused look.
That pupil of yours is a bit dense, isn't she?
Sunny frowned, offended by her words, and demanded to know what she meant. Effie giggled.
Well, you've been tutoring her for a whole month, and she still has no idea who the two of us are. We're just two average, random awakened to her. I mean, it's not surprising that she didn't recognize you. But I am a very famous person, you know.
Sunny smiled slightly.
Yeah, your pride must be really hurt, venerable raised by wolves. Please accept my sincere apologies. Not everyone you see is obsessed with the awakened. Rain, for example, is more interested in historical stuff about or from before the spell. Plus, the government mostly uses your dream realm appearance to plaster all over the city, so.
Effie waved a hand.
I'm joking, you doofus. She's a good kid.
She paused for a moment and then added,
Well, that's why it hurts me to see her wasting money on a hack like you.
That moment, there was a sound of a PTV stopping nearby and of light steps approaching their door. Effie's eyes shined. Turning her wheelchair, she opened the door and called out finally. Master Jet stood on the porch in her usual deep blue uniform with one hand raised to knock on the door. Her jacket, as always, was carelessly unbuttoned, revealing her slim waist and generous figure. Her short raven black hair was a bit messy, and there was a look of slight surprise in her icy blue eyes. Effie stared at the older woman for a few moments, disappointment clearly written on her face. Then, she said dejectedly that she was not food delivery. A polite smile appeared on Master Jet's face.
Ah, awakened Athena, it's an honor to meet the famous raised by wolves. I am Ascended Jet.
Effie glanced at her, then at Sunny, then back at Master Jet. Then she smiled and remarked that the doofus had done a good job and that she approved. Sunny gave her a murderous look, cursed inwardly, and turned to Master Jet, asking if he needed to prepare. She shook her head.
Your usual memories should do. If everything goes well, you won't even need to use them.
He hesitated, and then asked what would happen if it didn't go well. Master Jet grinned, making Sunny suddenly feel very uneasy for some reason.
Well, then it'll go badly, won't it? We'll know when we know.
With that, she looked at Effie and said,
Please excuse us. Time is of the essence, so we will have to leave immediately. It was very nice to meet you, awakened Athena.
Effie winked at her.
Sure, it was nice to meet you too. Bring snacks next time.
Sunny felt his ears turning red and promised himself to have a word with her when he got back. Or better yet, kill her. Yes, that would be much better.
What next time? There won't be a next time.
He quickly put on shoes and followed Master Jet outside, then got into the familiar PTV. As soon as the doors closed, she sent the vehicle moving at full speed, the acceleration pressing Sunny into the seat. The streets of the terrace district flew by in a blur. Master Jet glanced at him, then said wistfully,
That's a nice home you have there. Feels strange, right? To own one. I did the same thing after becoming an awakened, actually. Granted, it took me a bit longer to earn enough. You could have afforded a much better district, though. You know that, right?
Sunny shrugged.
Yeah, I know, but I like it here. It's quiet.
She looked into the window and smiled, agreeing that she couldn't deny that. Sunny waited for a few moments, then finally asked,
Master Jet, sorry, but what exactly are we doing?
She briefly glanced at the control screen of the PTV, sent it into a sharp turn, and answered calmly.
We are going to hunt down a dangerous beast.
He frowned and asked what kind of a beast it was. Master Jet remained silent for a few moments. Then she glanced at him and smiled darkly.
The most dangerous beast there is, a human.
Sunny shifted in his seat, a bleak expression appearing on his face. He echoed the word, a human. Why would a master be hunting down a human? There was police for that, unless, of course, that human was an awakened. Sunny was aware that special government agents, carriers of the nightmare spell themselves, dealt with those awakened who broke the law simply because police officers were often helpless against criminals that possessed inhuman strength and wielded bizarre or dangerous aspect abilities. It made sense that Master Jet would be involved in that side of government work too. But honestly, he didn't know too much about how these things usually went. Glancing at her, Sunny asked whether it was an awakened criminal. Master Jet spared him a short glance.
And criminal, yes, you might say that.
She remained quiet for a few moments, and then corrected herself.
No, actually do not. The man we must find is not a criminal. He is an animal, a rabid one.
Sunny frowned and observed that it was an interesting choice of words. Master Jet was concentrating on driving the PTV, so she didn't answer immediately. When she did, however, her voice was strangely calm.
You are not an inexperienced sleeper anymore, Sunny, so I will be straightforward. You, of all people, should be able to understand. The nightmares, the dream realm, they take a toll. Some people endure, some people break. Some people carry the nightmares back with them to the real world.
A dark expression slowly appeared on her face.
From what I heard about the Forgotten Shore, you witnessed the worst of what the spell does to us. Yes, we awakened are at the top of the world. Those who return alive, that is. We have all the privileges, all the money, all the power. But the mark it leaves on us never goes away. After all the pain, blood, and horror, after all the crap, we the lucky few are forced to survive many crack.
Master Jet looked at the road, her icy eyes full of unimaginable coldness.
Some crack a little and some crack a lot. The government portrays us awakened as powerful and noble, the saviors of the world. But really, most of us are walking on the edge, just one little step away from madness. All that trauma can mess one up really good, you know. It's all a big, big mess. So, when one of the awakened loses control up and makes that last step, what do you think happens?
Sunny remained silent for a while, thinking about the damage a deranged awakened could do in the mundane world. His expression became dark and heavy. He didn't even want to imagine. He said quietly that when that happened, she received a call. Master Jet glanced at him and smiled.
Smart, yes, when an awakened goes out of control, I, or someone like me, receives the call. Things like that usually don't get out, because the government doesn't want them to. For obvious reasons. Everything is dealt with quietly, and so here we are.
Sunny didn't speak for a bit. Then he asked,
So what exactly is going to happen? We find this guy, talk him down or overpower him, and then put him in cuffs, arrest him.
What a funny thought that was, him making an arrest. Sunny had been on the other side of this equation a few times in the past, and never in his life had he imagined putting handcuffs on someone and not the other way around. Master Jet gave him a complicated look. There was almost pity.
No, we are not going to arrest him.
Sunny blinked a couple of times.
Will he be free to walk around as though nothing happened until the trial?
Of course, there was another, much darker answer. As though reading his thoughts, Jet slowly shook her head.
No, he won't be walking around.
Sunny looked into the window and breathed a quiet ah. Master Jet sighed.
If they summoned me, then things are already beyond that. Think about it. If a mundane human needs to be contained, you can put them in prison. But we are awakened. Realistically, there is no prison that can be built to hold us. Not with every aspect being unique and demanding unique means of containment. So there will be no arrest and there will be no trial.
She accelerated the PTV even further, and then said evenly,
There will only be an execution.
Sunny looked out the window, not sure how he felt about that. Yes, what Master Jet said made sense. Awakened were too powerful and too dangerous. If one of them lost control, then they needed to be dealt with somehow. In a perfect world, they would go through the same process that mundane humans went through. They would be arrested, tried, and either locked in a cell or receive proper help in a mental institution. But this was not a perfect world. So, instead, they would just be hunted down and executed, and the whole thing would be swept under the rug to preserve the spotless reputation the Awakened enjoyed. Although harsh, this was the somber reality. He wasn't against the idea itself. He just didn't know how to feel about the fact that this time he was going to be the executioner. Finally turning to Master Jet, Sunny lingered for a few moments and then asked,
So why me, of all people? Why ask me for help?
Master Jet glanced at him, then grinned.
3 reasons, really.
She blew through an intersection, almost crashing into a heavy cargo vehicle, and then dodged it at the last second.
First, I know you. There are many people who could have helped, but very few whom I would trust to have my back.
Sunny nodded, strangely pleased to hear that.
Second, from the initial information I received, the suspect might have an aspect that is somewhat similar to yours, high affinity to shadows. So, you'll be helpful when we're tracking him down, and if things go south, he won't be able to escape easily.
He thought to himself that another shadow user was interesting. She gave him a calm look and added,
And lastly, there are a lot of people working for the government, but very few who are suited for this kind of work, unlike you and I.
Sunny considered her words. After a while, he asked,
Because I am from the outskirts, just like you.
Master Jet remained silent for a bit, and then gave him a bright smile.
No, it's because you are a killer, just like me.
Sunny wanted to deny her words, but in the end, simply turned away to look at the city streets flying by. Master Jet knew, of course. She had long known that he had the capacity to be a killer because of the cruel past the two of them shared, and more than that, she had access to the records about the events of the Forgotten Shore that the government agents had compiled. Out there, Sunny had killed his fair share of people. He had not been the most active participant in the civil war for the throne of the Bright Castle, but his hands were covered in blood too. There were very few survivors of the Dark City who, like Aiko, managed to go through that morbid ordeal without staining themselves with human blood. And then there were other lives that almost no one knew that he had ended. Castor, Harris, the hunters who had kept Kai locked in the dark well, and Harper. Even before that, he had killed the old slaver, Shifty. Scholar and Oro of the Nine without batting an eye. Honestly, it was not a big deal. Except for maybe Harper, Sunny never lost sleep over any of the humans that had died by his hand. If he was honest with himself, he had to admit that some of them he even enjoyed killing a little. And it was precisely the fact that he didn't think of it as a big deal that proved Master Jet's words. Sunny was a killer, and not in the sense that he had killed before or had been taught how to. He had an innate aptitude for that sort of thing, and there were not a lot of people who did. In fact, he only knew 3. The first one was himself. The second was Nephis. She was the one who had taught him about murder after all. Maybe that was one of the reasons why Changing Star had chosen to impart her family battle style to Sunny. Maybe she had recognized that the two of them were similar, that both of them had seen and known the truth of this world, that he would be able to understand. The third one was Master Jet. Sunny suddenly realized that he didn't know much about her, apart from her rank, her past as a kid from the outskirts, and her role as a government operative. Everything that he thought he knew about Master Jet had come from what others told him about her, painting an intimidating and imposing picture of the fearsome Soul Reaper. That picture, however, did not reveal the real human hidden behind the loud nickname. In fact, it only served to obscure her more. What nightmares Jet herself had survived on her path to becoming a master? What were her hopes, her convictions? What were her goals? He had no idea. Thinking about it, Sunny hesitated for a while and then said,
Master Jet, can I ask a question?
She glanced at him briefly and smiled. Jet replied, sure. Sunny carefully chose his words before formulating a question. In the end, he asked simply,
Why are you not a saint?
Master Jet laughed, her voice full of amusement.
What a peculiar question. You say it as though becoming a saint is something that just anyone can do.
He shook his head, not willing to let it go.
But you are not just anyone. Sure, you might be younger than most masters out there, but very few of them can compare to you in terms of talent and power. The fact that you chose to challenge the second nightmare proves that you have ambition. So why stop?
She spared him another glance and asked with an easy smile, "Why? What have you heard?" Sunny shifted uncomfortably and muttered a quiet curse under his breath.
I've been told that no one wants to go into a nightmare with you because of your problematic personality, murderous savage and psychopathic killer. These were the precise words they used. Sorry.
Her smile turned wider.
Really haven't heard those before. I like it, but what do you yourself think?
He remained silent for a bit, and then said with a bit of doubt,
I don't think I buy it. I just took it at face value as an inexperienced sleeper, but after the Forgotten Shore, that statement doesn't seem to make sense. Sure, it is important to trust those who you enter the nightmare with, but at the end of the day, strength is strength, and you are very strong. You also work for the government, which proves your ability to be an adequate part of a larger collective, to work in a team, so I simply don't understand.
Master Jet did not speak for a while, concentrating on the road. Eventually, she answered, a hint of darkness finding its way into her voice.
That is because you don't know enough. You're young and haven't had to deal with the awakened affairs a lot. Plus, some of these things people only learn after reaching a certain stage. You're not at that stage yet, but since you asked, I'll answer.
She looked at him, the smile disappearing from her face.
It is very simple, really. Basically, you need the right people to help you become a master. But to become a saint, you need for the right people to not obstruct you. Take it as you will.
She didn't say anything else, and Sunny did now ask, a deep frown appearing on his face. He echoed her words quietly, for the right people, to not obstruct you. He understood what Master Jet was hinting at, of course. He knew enough to come to the right conclusion. What she just told him was that to become a saint, one had to receive permission. And it wasn't too hard to realize who had to give that permission. The sovereigns. Who else but them? The three supremes who ruled the most powerful awakened. The legacy clans, from the shadows. Come to think of it, such an arrangement made a lot of sense. There were just a few dozen saints in the world, and each of them possessed unbelievable, mind-boggling powers. Would the sovereigns have allowed for such powerful individuals to exist outside of their control? From everything that Sunny knew about the vile nature of power and how the world worked, the answer was obvious. No. So, did every saint out there actually belong to one of the sovereigns? It seemed that they did. Even Sky Tide of the White Feather clan, who gave Sunny an impression of being a reclusive and fiercely independent woman, was beholden to a great clan, and therefore to Anvil of Valor, Vale of Aster, Song, and Vale, the sovereign of that clan. What about people like Master Jet then? Someone capable enough to become a saint, but either labeled as undesirable or simply unwilling to submit to one of the Supremes. What was the obstruction she had spoken about? Was it a simple lack of support, or would the sovereigns go much further to prevent an independent saint from appearing in the world? If they had no problem with sending assassins to kill the 6-year-old daughter of their former comrade and companion, then they would surely have none with making someone like Jet meet an unfortunate end should she act out of line. He lowered his head and briefly covered his eyes with a hand.
It's absolutely the same crap as what Gunlog had done in the Bright Castle. Gods, how unoriginal.
But that was the thing about vile things. People loved to romanticize evil and those who committed it, creating countless alluring characters to act as compelling and brilliant villains. But in reality, human evil was almost always banal. It always followed the same disgusting, predictable paths and led to the same hateful end. No wonder Nephi's wanted to destroy them so much. Sunny's thoughts were suddenly interrupted by the PTV coming to an abrupt stop. Looking out the window, he saw that they had arrived at a dark and narrow alley, which was currently blocked off by a police cordon. Blinking lights of several armored police vehicles drowned it in an unsettling glow, and there were many officers on the scene, their faces pale and tense. Master Jet yawned, stretched, and gave him a crooked grin.
Rise and shine, awakened sunness. We've arrived.
Sonny get out of the PTV, somewhat apprehensive of what he was about to see. The police officers present at the scene looked very relieved to see Master Jet and him appear. Their tense faces cleared, and the darkness hiding in their eyes seemed to dissipate a little. This was not at all how these types of situations were usually portrayed in popular media. In the crime mystery shows, whenever a plucky mundane detective encountered a cold and by-the-book awakened agent, their relationship always started very confrontationally, with mutual disdain and debates over who was supposed to handle the case, only to end as an entertaining team-up, of course. Once again, reality turned out to be very different from how storytellers like to portray it. There was no conflict over jurisdiction or negativity expressed by the police officers. Instead, they were genuinely happy to see the awakened specialists arrive. Well, of course they were. It was just as the old policeman had once told, right before Sonny faced the first nightmare. If he died there and no awakened was near, they would have to fight the nightmare creature his body had turned into themselves. And that was not something mundane humans ever wished to do. Master Jet walked over to one of the policemen and greeted him with a short nod, despite the fact that he was much older than her, not to mention Sonny himself. The officer treated them with the utmost respect.
Nice to see you again, ma'am. Greetings, sir. Let me show you the way.
He led them deeper into the alley, toward a heavy metal door that hid in the deep shadows. It was wide open, and there were strange flashes of intense white light coming out of it, mixing with the red glow of the police sirens. The whole situation seemed a little surreal to Sonny, as though he was in the midst of a strange dream. Sonny mused to himself, I mean, where else would I be addressed as sir by a police officer? Life sure is funny sometimes. Slightly amused by this thought, he turned to Master Jet and asked, What is this place? She hesitated for a few moments, then said in an unexpectedly dark tone,
It's a club of sorts, called the Slaughterhouse, one of the few such establishments in the city.
Sonny stared at the door, which had no sign or any indication that there was a club on the other side of it. Was this a marketing ploy to create a feeling of mystique and exclusivity, or were there things going on inside that needed to be hidden? He remarked, A peculiar name for a nightclub. Master Jet smiled with a corner of her mouth.
It is meant for a very specific clientele. The ground floor is your usual dance club, but beneath it there is a VIP area with an underground arena. There is nothing illegal going on there, just things that are in poor taste.
She paused and then added somberly,
They send echoes, usually dormant beasts, to fight against mundane fighters there. The fighters are paid generously, of course, and the club profits from the rich assholes who enjoy watching this sort of thing enough to recoup losses if one of the echoes is accidentally destroyed. Everyone wins, I guess.
Sonny frowned. He knew that wealthy people were big fans of wasteful forms of entertainment, and that there were arenas where precious echoes were made to fight each other just for the spectacle of it, hiring mundane humans to battle them, though. Wasn't it a bit too much? He asked. Did I suddenly become a child after the awakening? Of course, nothing was ever too much. Sonny knew all about how vice worked from his childhood in the outskirts. His current surprise was just because he lacked knowledge of what forms it took among the more affluent layers of society. He asked, So what happened in that slaughterhouse? Master Jet shrugged.
That's what we have to find out. All I know is that everyone inside is dead. Kind of ironic, actually.
The police officer guiding them spared her a glance, and then said hoarsely,
It's a proper mess there, ma'am. Not for people with weak stomachs, and also not something that a mundane human would have been able to do.
Sonny frowned and muttered, Charming. Inside, the air was filled with the smell of blood. Sonny found himself in a vast hall flooded by flashing lights, blinding white mixing with short moments of absolute darkness to create a strange and invasive atmosphere. It was hard to perceive anything in this strobe light hell. Master Jet frowned.
What's with the light show?
The policeman looked down in embarrassment.
Sorry, ma'am. We figured out how to turn off the music, but the lights are giving us some trouble.
She gave him an unamused look.
Well, get on with it.
The officer turned around and walked away, shouting at his colleagues. A few moments later, the hall suddenly became enveloped in darkness, and then the regular illumination kicked in. Without the constantly flashing strobe lights, the club looked smaller and more worn down than Sonny had expected. He did not pay too much attention to the design of the interior, the raised stage, or the bar with hundreds of expensive-looking bottles standing on the shelves behind it, with a gloomy expression on his face. Sonny was looking at the bodies. There were more than a dozen of them, all broken and terribly disfigured as though chewed and spewed out by a tornado. But of course, a natural disaster had nothing to do with what had happened in the seedy club. The result only looked like it. This was the work of an awakened. Suddenly, he remembered Master Jet's question, seeing it in a new light. When an awakened loses control, what do you think happens? The answer was right in front of him. Terribly battered human bodies were lying on the floor, drowning in pools of blood. Indeed, this was not a sight for those who had weak stomachs. But for better or worse, Sonny had seen enough horrors to not be moved too much by such a scene. It left a deep impression even on him, though. Sonny didn't have to look too closely to realize what had transpired. The position of the bodies, the nature of their wounds. The murderer had not used some powerful memory or let an echo loose on these people. No, it was much simpler. They just did it with their hands. Back during the gate battle, Sonny had thrown a heavy vehicle at the advancing horde of nightmare creatures, carving a bloody path in their ranks. That was the strength of an awakened. Even if he had been augmented by a shadow, his own strength was still vastly superior to that of a mundane human. A frenzied awakened could tear through a dozen humans in a matter of seconds, and none of them would be able to do anything to stop it. In front of a spell carrier, mundane humans were like paper dolls. It only took a little effort to destroy them.
Well, that bastard.
Sonny remembered how he had doubted whether or not he wanted to play the role of an executioner on the way to the crime scene. Rain could have been one of the victims. He could have been one, too, before becoming an awakened. As he was looking at the broken bodies, all his doubts disappeared. As Sonny studied the bodies, Master Jet went away to talk to the police officers and then returned with one of them. There was a disappointed expression on her face.
No usable recordings left. Figures. Places like this one only exist because they value the privacy of their clients, and the few cameras they did have show nothing but darkness.
Sonny looked at her, then sighed.
Not much to tell from the victims, too. The murderer just used their fists.
She shrugged.
That's how it usually goes in situations like this. The most likely scenario is that the murderer was one of the clients, who went on a rampage because of either alcohol or stimulants, and a momentary failure to hold on to their sanity. So I doubt that this mess was premeditated.
Master Jet remained silent for a moment, and then added.
He was lucid enough to use his aspect to obscure the cameras, though, so dealing with him won't be too simple.
With that, she turned to the police officer and asked,
Any survivors? Do we have witnesses?
He hesitated for a bit, then gave her a strange look.
Yes, actually there are a few, but...
The officer didn't finish the sentence and just stared at them with an uneasy expression. Sonny raised an eyebrow.
But what are they refusing to talk?
The policeman shook his head slowly.
No, they're not refusing. I don't know, something is wrong with them. They just don't speak or even react really. I've seen a lot of people in shock, and sometimes they can seem almost catatonic. But this is something else. Gave us all the creeps, to be honest.
Sonny and Master Jet glanced at each other, and then one of them said, "Lead the way." The officer sighed, then escorted them to the back of the club, where an inconspicuous door led to the service rooms. The witnesses were gathered in a small office, standing there motionlessly, with nervous paramedics trying to determine the reason for their condition. There were 5 of them, all sharing the same blank, strangely peaceful expression on their faces. They were completely silent, motionless, and still. They did not react to the arrival of new people at all. Their eyes were calm and empty. Sonny paled.
How is this possible?
It only took him a second to recognize what was wrong with the survivors, of course. In fact, they weren't survivors at all. These people were dead. To be more precise, they were hollow. Sonny asked, his voice tight with disbelief, "How can a mundane human be hollow?" Suddenly, he felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Looking at Master Jet, he saw that she had a deep frown on her face, too. The massacre in the dance hall was bad enough. But this just made the whole situation frightening and eerie. If before Sonny was just disgusted, now he was starting to get concerned. He breathed, "What the hell?" Master Jet stared at the 5 hollows for a few moments, then turned to the paramedics.
Go take a break, guys. Let these people be. They are already dead.
One of the paramedics, a mature woman with short blonde hair and gentle eyes, looked at her with confusion.
I'm sorry, ma'am, but they're fine. We need to.
Jet let out a heavy sigh.
Their souls are destroyed. There is nothing you can do to help them. Something else will take care of the rest.
The paramedic looked at her for a while, then glanced at the ground and silently walked away. Her colleagues followed, expressions of regret, anger, and horror clearly written on their faces. The police officer stayed, but made a point of standing as far away from the hollows as he could. Master Jet stood silently for a few moments, her scowls growing deeper, then turned to Sonny.
Answering your question, I don't know.
He hesitated for a bit, then asked,
But how can a mundane human become a hollow? It's only supposed to happen to those who die in the dream realm, right?
She glanced at him, then silently shook her head. Eventually, Master Jet said,
Wrong. There is a very small chance of a powerful soul attack creating a hollow. But beings capable of dealing direct soul damage are very rare, so it doesn't happen too often. Almost never, really.
Sonny walked closer to the 5 empty humans and studied them.
Can you do something like this?
Master Jet lingered for a bit, then answered simply,
If I am really precise.
Something was very wrong with these people, and not just the fact that they were hollow. There was something else, something that almost made Sonny's hair stand on end, a feeling of subtle but profound wrongness. He reached out with shadow sense and flinched. Master Jet did not miss that sudden reaction.
What, did you discover something?
Sonny gritted his teeth, then nodded.
They're shadows, they're dead.
She stared at him with a raised eyebrow.
How does this work? I don't know much about shadow affinity, sorry. It's a very rare type of aspect. Does damage to a shadow correlate to soul damage?
Sonny thought for a bit, then shrugged.
I am not so sure myself. There's no manual for it after all. But only 2 things ever managed to damage my shadow. One was another shadow, and the other was a soul attack.
Sonny wasn't sure that he was comfortable providing Master Jet, a person specializing in exactly such a type of attack, with this information, but decided to share it nevertheless. He trusted her that much, at least.
So, since shadows are susceptible to soul damage, it is not too much of a leap to assume that they share a deep connection to the soul or are tied to it somehow, at least.
She nodded and remained silent for a while thinking. Then, Master Jet echoed his recent question.
Can you do something like this?
Sonny shook his head.
No, my aspect doesn't have means of dealing damage to someone's shadow, at least not yet.
His shadow sense, meanwhile, spread throughout the whole club, allowing him to perceive it as a whole. And there, deeper underground, he noticed something strange. Sunny lingered for a few moments and then turned to the police officer.
Gather your colleagues and leave. Don't come inside again until either Master Jet or I tell you to.
The policeman opened his mouth, wishing to say something, then simply nodded and hurriedly walked away. Master Jet glanced at Sunny with a question in her eyes.
And what was that all about?
Sunny gave her a dark look and said, "How do I say this? I think the killer is still inside."